let's see. Test. I guess I should just go. I've got to set my OBS up to do intros again for you guys. I have like an intro video run like I did on Twitch. I've got them all set up. Actually, I think I probably could just hit a button. Now that I think about it, it probably would work. Let me test that. Let me see if that works.
Alex Jones, and I'm here to tell you folks, the world has fallen. The fascist globalist overlords.
Okay, I don't want to do that video. That's that video is not something you're supposed to do for YouTube. Oh shit, that was a bad idea. I just wanted to check my goal. All right, we should be getting going soon. Okay, all right, cool. Can you guys hear me? Fine. Let me undo that. WTF, my name here is this. So Newly Awakened, I'm trying to do some of these debates that I just don't think make good standalone videos. I think I'm going to go back to streaming them, but just doing them on YouTube, because the competition between doing a video on YouTube and then or on Twitch and then putting it on YouTube and splitting the audience that way, it just destroyed both platforms. It ended up where there were people that were like, oh, well, I'll just catch it when it goes on YouTube. So they wouldn't come into the live streams on Twitch. And so we would have less numbers on Twitch, or people would be on Twitch and then it would go, I'd put it on YouTube and they were like, oh, I already saw it live on Twitch when it was live. And so the two of them were competing with each other, and both of them were like reducing my watch duration, how many viewers I had live, and how many people, the click-through rate, right? Because click-through rate is determined by, the video gets sent out to someone, and then they determine whether or not they click it. Well, if they've already seen it and they happen to be a subscriber on YouTube, then they wouldn't click it. And so like, it became very obvious that this concept of like being on multiple platforms, it works for some people. It wasn't working for us because I mostly did long form debate content and things like that. Maybe it's the type of content I was doing and I need more short form content, which I know I do need to do. And so what I'm going to try is to do some of these debates and long form stuff. I'm going to just do them live on YouTube and simultaneously put out some other content here on YouTube and just kind of see what it does. Thirst trap ASMR content. Yeah. I mean, like also, yeah, Twitch is just becoming worse and worse with the censorship and with like pushing people. I mean, like there were other reasons I got off of Twitch. But in terms of like what type of YouTube content I'm talking about doing. Also, I don't have an editor anymore. And like, so it's like putting everything out edited is a ton of work, but maybe streaming some of these debates live so that way I don't actually have to edit them. They're just kind of already up. Might be good. We'll see. I'm just doing a test. I'm doing a test over the next couple of weeks. See how doing some of these streaming. I think I do better streaming anyways. Yeah, I do think of the trans deer person or whatever. That is something I often think about. What time is it? We got 3 minutes. Yeah, and YouTube is way. God, I need to switch headphones again. I hate that I can't do this. I can play games with these headphones, but trying to talk while nothing's going on makes these in-ear headphones freak out. But yeah, now that the pandemic is kind of behind us as a major topic, YouTube freaks out a lot less. Neil Mohan also, I mean, he sucks, but he cares more about making money than he does about being woke, even though his wife is super woke. So it seems like he doesn't do something unless there's money to be made in it. And if there's money to be made in it, then YouTube will do it, but so will everybody else. But yeah, YouTube is nowhere near as bad as Twitch. Like you can talk about transgender issues on YouTube. You can't on Twitch. I mean, you can, but you just you should expect to be utterly destroyed. Oh, yeah. We're going to see like typical right-wing pro-Trump MAGA accounts super censored here soon. And that's because there's money to be made in silencing those. Neil Mohan will assuredly do that. And like some of us libertarians and stuff will get caught up in it, but I don't think all of us will. All right, I think we're getting in. Why is my fucking sharpness? Something's off on my camera. Hold on. Put this over here. Oh, everything seems to be okay. Or maybe not. Yeah, it was a little sharp. A little sharp. A little heavily saturated. I think my lighting is different. It might be because I have the window open and it's raining outside, so my lighting situation changed slightly. Just waiting on Prime Guys to come in here. Prime Guys is going to moderate it because it was kind of an impromptu thing that Fairy Queen wanted to discuss based off of the last Prime Guys. So it should be fun.
Hey. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh. Indeed I can. And I had like my volume all the way up, so that was fun. Let's get
Yo,
ourselves.
Fairy Queen, you might want to fix your camera.
Why? What's wrong with it?
You're like super washed out. Like your brightness is too high or something.
It's the light. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a. Okay, let's try this. This is the problem with not being tan. Even a little bit of light like makes you look like a sheet of paper.
You should be proud, just like our friend Scott here, right? You should be proud of your white skin, okay? All right.
Okay.
Also, to be fair, Fairy Queen's way whiter than I am.
Indeed.
This is probably true in every way. So. Listen, I'm not ashamed of my pumpkin spice, okay? I get it every October and I'm proud of it, damn it, okay? Love that pumpkin spice.
Yo, me too. I do love pumpkin spice.
Yeah. I am trying to... How do I do this again? I know I stream. I'm like just trying to get myself off of the thing. I wanted to only show video. Oh, I found it. Okay. There we go. I took myself off of my own view here, so it's just YouTube. All right. I won't bother showing my face. It's useless.
Why? Show your face. It doesn't matter. I don't care.
Yeah. Prime, you show your face.
Every other right. Also, every other moderator that I know of, like modern day debates, they don't interrupt at all, and there still will have some goofy motherfucker on camera like the whole time. Andrew does it on the Crucible. Like Wick does it. I can't think of anybody that hides the face as a moderator.
It's fine. I'm unnecessary here. But thank you both.
Do this then.
For being around. And Fairy Queen, you're looking a bit better there with your camera.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought the Fairy Queen honestly was like the effect you were trying to do, like with your camera. It reminded me of Lord of the Rings, right, with the elves and how they're
Landriel or whatever when she gets like super fucking bright and she's like, "I will
super
be
bright."
Yeah, exactly.
All I will be powerful once I have the ring. And you're like,
oh, shit. Okay. But yeah, thank you both for being here. We are doing this 1v1 debate between our friends Fabian Liberty Scott and our friend Fairy Queen. They had a bit of a back and forth during the last Reverie, and so FQ wanted to continue that conversation. Scott was also graciously agreed. I'll introduce them, and they can introduce the topic themselves. Scott, you first.
Yeah, I'm Scott. You follow me on Fabian Liberty. I'm trying out streaming on YouTube. So if you want to come have fun on YouTube, I don't know, do it. It should be fun. But I have been on a hiatus for like the last year in terms of streaming and just been kind of doing the occasional video. But nevertheless, come check me out on YouTube or on Twitter, Fabian Liberty. You know where to find me. It's where all the lefties are mad. Love you.
Awesome. Next, Fairy Queen, please.
Hi, I'm Fairy Queen. You can find me at Fairy Queen's Cottage on YouTube, and you can also find me at Fairy _Queen on Twitter. I'm a feminist politics streamer, and I'm here to get into the middle of it. So,
Okay. Fairy Queen, you wanted to have this conversation, so I'll let you go first.
yeah.
Introduce your perspective, and just so the audience knows, so we're gonna do this for like a 2-minute timers on talks, and if the other person agrees, then like that participant can extend their time by 90 seconds. We'll see how the conversation goes, and maybe if it's just flowing really well, then we'll dispense with the rules. But we'll start with 2-minute timers. So please, Fairy Queen.
Mhm. So I'm playing with this idea, and I proposed a hypothetical in our last streaming debate. And it's not really a hypothetical; it's more of a thought experiment. So the what I basically proposed was, if you have a natural right to property, if you own your body and you own all facets of your body, and then you choose to have sex with someone else, and then you become pregnant, why logically would the child not be your property? And I think, like, from if we're looking from a purely natural rights perspective, we put the morality on the shelf, we put pragmatism on the shelf, we put any feelings we might have about considering our children to be our slaves on the shelf for a minute. I think it logically, unfortunately, from a libertarian natural rights perspective, and Scott disagrees with me, which is kind of why I want to get into this. I think it has to follow, because in any other situation, if you had a pile of resources and then you went to another person who brought you their resources, and then you both combined your resources to create something, you would say that this is your property. Now, and the reason why I think this is why I wanted to have this conversation, this isn't a gotcha. Oh, if you're a libertarian, you believe something ridiculous, right? That's often like how conversations about libertarianism go. So, for instance, the classic, "Do I have the right to have nukes in my backyard?" Right? What would we do without public schools? What would we do without social services? How are we going to pay for roads? That's not the reason why I'm bringing up the child slavery like thought experiment. It's not to say this is the consequence of this if you accept this. What I'm saying is, I think that this fundamentally defeats one of the major arguments that are often made in defense of libertarianism, which is that it is a defense of individual rights in the face of in the face of the collective. That if you are a libertarian, and the reason like why you get to have your set of individual rights and why they're separate from the state is because you have a natural right to this stuff. But I think in a really weird way, when you follow this to its logical conclusion, I think in a really weird way, libertarianism, like hardcore libertarianism, becomes a really weird form of socialism, where in fact, not only is there collective ownership, but you in fact do not own yourself, and you are collectively owned, and like what you are
Okay.
allowed or not allowed to do is decided by the state anyway. And we can get more
Sure.
into it later. That's probably too much. But
No, you're fine. Please, it's taking me a while to find my stopwatch program, so you might have gotten like a little more time.
sorry.
It's
Yeah,
fine.
no, give it. Yeah, you can give him an extra minute or however long I went on for. So I apologize. I
uh,
wasn't watching the clock.
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. So when you wanted to have this conversation, I was, at first I was like, oh, okay, all right, whatever. I mull it over and I'm like, this is a great opportunity to teach libertarianism and what it actually is. Because I actually appreciate that you're engaging with the ideas and that you're trying to understand them. And so I don't actually begrudge you for not understanding libertarianism. Like I'll say that first, like up front. You don't understand what you're saying. And that's okay because you haven't read 7,000 pages, right? I'm not going to be like the Marxist, that says, oh, that wasn't true Marxism, and then just go read all these books and you'll get it one day. I'm not going to be that. Like, we'll have this conversation. I appreciate it. So I really love the concept of really starting with property rights. And I know that I love that because I once held the view that you hold, right? Which is that when I was a burgeoning neophyte libertarian, I was under the conception that we own ourselves. It's a common thing said within libertarian circles. And I held on to this belief for so long, even kind of in the back of my mind without really challenging it, until I spoke with Stefan Kinsella, right, about the formulation of property rights, the proper explanation for how those are created. And I realized that this was actually a holdover from John Locke, right? That the concept of homesteading with mixing your labor and your property rights as of the establishment is coming all the way back from John Locke, who famously wrote in, his response to Hume, life, liberty, and property, right? And then Thomas Jefferson, of course, changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because he was afraid of supporting slavery. Ironically, hilariously enough, but nevertheless. And so the real answer, when you really go deep into the theory and you try and understand these things, is that property rights are a heuristic that many libertarians that don't understand the philosophy deeply utilize. And so if you're going to go that deep and attack it, what you'll find is that you're right, that there is a contradiction in what you're saying. The problem is that the contradiction is one of your creation or one of misunderstanding, not necessarily the actual theory. So
I've
the
given you
actual
30
theory,
seconds extra. Do you want to?
Okay,
I'll
so
finish
can
in
you
one
like
sentence. The theory is very simple. You don't own yourself. That is not actually a maxim. The right of bodily autonomy is where where you derive the right to private property. And if that's the key problem here, is that you're postulating that you own yourself, and then you're finding the contradiction from that. And I agree. You don't own yourself. That's not the proper way to look at it.
So I specifically wanted to ask about that because I know we had this
Mhm.
conversation on Monday and you said that the right to private property comes from bodily autonomy. And at the time, I didn't question it. We had like 9 people on the panel, but
Of course.
I gave it some thought and I that doesn't make sense to me. It would seem to me that it should be the reverse. That in fact the reason why you have bodily autonomy is because you own yourself. And you own yourself. And if we're going off of, well, we can go, there's one perspective which is it's because you invest your labor in it. I know that's not what you think. What you think it's because you're the first user of the unclaimed item, right? But
Mhm.
then how would that not apply to yourself if you are, I mean, I'm saying, and like for the sake of the discussion, that I don't know if you are the first user of your body, but let's just say for the sake of the discussion, you are, right? So,
Mhm.
how would that not therefore? Why does bodily
Well,
autonomy come before private property?
who is the first user?
I mean, we can get into that. I think
Right. So
so. I
I
don't.
mean, like, just if we just think about it for a second, right? Like, who is the first? The first user is a person, right? So when you say, it only makes sense to me that the right to private property gives you the right to self ownership, right? Or it gives you the right to bodily autonomy via self ownership. It becomes circular, right? Which I think you would agree with because you're not a libertarian. You're attempting to do an internal critique, right? And I respect that. But it would be circular. It would be circular to say, I have rights because I own myself, and I own myself because I have rights, right? It becomes a
Mhm.
circular argument. So it's actually the first user principle is that I have bodily autonomy, and bodily autonomy is cornered via argumentation ethics and the non-aggression principle. And then that bodily autonomy then gives us private property. But I'll let you continue.
Okay.
Seemed like you were on something,
So
but I wanted to
yeah,
kind of,
no,
I felt that was
for sure.
important.
So basically, like what you're saying is it's a circular. Like I have. Okay, I understand that aspect of it, but even if that's the case,
Hmm.
I still think there seems to be a bit of a okay, so bodily autonomy, the non-aggression principle. So let's talk specifically about the first user. Like it seems intuitive. I don't know that it necessarily follows. So for instance, like
Hmm.
do I not so I thought about this in the car as I was driving today, right? So if I pick up an orange and I
Hmm.
eat the orange, right? I'm not consciously digesting the orange, right? I'm not thinking about digesting. I'm not thinking about my stomach or anything within me, but I'm still nonetheless using it, right? The fact that I'm
Hmm.
consciously aware of whether or not I'm eating the orange and digesting it has nothing to do with whether or not I am using the orange, right? So couldn't you
Hmm.
therefore say, right, like if when somebody becomes pregnant that I am using my eggs and you could make the
Yeah.
case that like someone else is using their sperm, right? And we
Well,
also, I mean, and then we can get into the abortion aspect of it as well. Like, when does a person become, a human being? When do
yeah,
they
I
lose
think this conversation complicates it. I think trying to like, it seems like first I feel like it would be much better to establish rights as extant, and for you to have an understanding of like first user principle and things like that before we get to the next level of complexity, which is then your presumed contradictions, because like you don't understand, and I'm not trying to insult, I'm just saying like it would be no different than if you were me talking to Prime Kai's about One Piece, right? He would far obviously be an expert on One Piece, and if I started talking bullshit about devil fruit, he would have to correct me, right? Like, this is my stuff, right? It takes a lot to know. And so I think first we need to establish those beginning things before you can presume that there's a contradiction between the one thing that you don't know and the other thing that we're talking about. Does that make sense?
does. Okay, so let's go back to it then. So you're saying that
Mhm.
like there's circular reasoning. I have bodily autonomy because I have the right to self-ownership. And I have the right to self-ownership because I have bodily autonomy. And you're saying that's a circular loop. And that's why it
Mhm.
doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Well, but if that's true, then doesn't that defeat the idea of bodily autonomy in the first place? Like, if we have something that
No.
follows from the line of circular reasoning? Because if you're right, if I have this because I have this, and it goes back and forth, right? I don't think
So,
I don't think you could say that like that self-ownership comes from bodily autonomy, because then I
well, I
could
don't
simply
believe
say
in
the same thing.
self-ownership. We keep
You don't
repeating
believe in
this term.
self-ownership.
Right. I don't
Okay.
believe in self-ownership. I mean, like, self-ownership is a heuristic that has been used for a long time to describe the similarity between the rights of ownership of property and the rights of bodily autonomy, because it's a simplistic way for libertarians or liberty-minded people to describe their right of bodily autonomy, because both bodily autonomy and private property come with it the right to exclusion, right? So consent to exclude me from using your body, for example, like would be like the right to not be raped is the right to exclude someone from using my body against my will. And it's the same thing with property. But I don't believe in the concept of self-ownership as a means of anything other than a heuristic, anything other than like a simplistic way to describe bodily autonomy.
Can you just tell me then, like, what is the distinct difference between bodily autonomy and self-ownership? Like, I know we're getting into the weeds, but I think it's important.
So
Like, what?
yeah, no, we are getting the weeds, and that's fine. If I own myself, then I can sell myself. So if I own myself, then I can, for example, sell myself into permanent slavery.
Mhm.
Because how could I not if I don't own myself? If I want $1 million, I could go, well, I'm going to be a slave for said $1 million. And now I give up all rights of bodily autonomy. The problem with that is that there's a distinct difference that I think you might intuit, which is that with bodily autonomy, I can break this contract. Now, I may have to pay some price for breaking said contract, right? I may have to work off some money to some value or whatever the law was, or I may go to some court system and determine that that contract was invalid for some reason because it was kind of like forced upon me in a situation where I had no choice, or et cetera, right? Like, was coerced into this contract, right? But if I'm truly own myself and it's not bodily autonomy that creates ownership, then Dr. Walter Block is correct in the right to slavery and to sell yourself into slavery. So that would be like one distinctive difference between the two. Like, they are very closely related, and that's why for a majority of things, it's simple enough to just say, "Oh, I own myself." But there are small things where it's important to recognize that that there is a distinct difference. One of them
Mhm.
being the circular logic, the other one being slavery.
So, if I can ask then, do you think people have the right to commit suicide then? Because if the point, if the ask is like the reason you can't sell yourself into slavery is because you can't you can't give up your rights. You can't sell
Mhm.
yourself into slavery because you immediately, well, I can think of like a ton of professions off the top of my head which absolutely put your bodily autonomy at risk, or which might be degrading, or which might strip away some of your rights. So could you voluntarily
So two
become a
things.
prisoner, for instance? Could you
Yeah, you can.
voluntarily be like, yeah.
Yeah, you can voluntarily do slavery, as I put it, but you still have a right to break that contract, right? That's the difference. Is that if I was property and I fully give up that property, right? So we'll have to go back a little bit. You cannot collectively own property under a libertarian theory. There can only be one owner of any form of property. You can have a contract which stipulates an agreement between multiple parties to use property, right? Such as like a house. A husband and a wife might have a contract, but ultimately either the husband or the wife owns it and the other person is in a contract with them where they agree to share it in some capacity. So that's where the contradiction comes in, is that to be an owner to another person is to say that I own my body and then I sold my body. I no longer own my body. The other person fully and completely owns me. Therefore, there is nothing I can ever do to express my will, and I completely given up those rights. You cannot sell those rights because those rights come from your bodily autonomy. Similarly, the difference between that and suicide is that no one else is an owner of my body. I am not an owner of my body either. I have bodily autonomy, but there's no contradiction if utilizing my bodily autonomy, I choose to end my life.
Sure. And so let's go through it. So there are a couple of things. So bodily autonomy, I can break the contract. So the point is, like, if I sell myself into slavery, let's say, if I sell myself as a slave, the reason why self-ownership doesn't apply here is because I can't really sell myself into slavery. And I can't really sell myself into slavery because
I signed a contract for my labor is what I did, right? It's the same thing as wage slavery, if you will, right? Like I agreed to do a job. And then you'll pay me money or you'll do something. We're in a contract. I can break that contract. Now, I may have to pay the price of breaking that contract. But to say slavery would be something distinctly different than, let's say, getting a job, right? Because I can quit my job. I can't quit being a slave if someone actually owns me. And therefore, my bodily autonomy is gone. And again, the bodily autonomy is what creates the private property right to begin with.
I don't know. So a couple of things. So I can break this contract another time. The reason why I wanted, and I know we're skipping ahead to the abortion example, has to do with at what point is bodily autonomy granted to you. So I think that's
Right.
that's part of the reason why I wanted to go into which I know you don't want to do.
No. I'm fine with doing it. It complicates an already complicated conversation because we have to talk about what ethics are and what morality is and why they're different. We have to talk about how property is established via first user principle. We have to talk about conflict and why ethical systems must be conflict reducing, right? And then we have to talk about contradictions, formal logic, and axioms. All of these things are things we have yet to discuss so that we can understand where this theory is coming from, and you're adding another layer of complexity. We can do that. And if you're up to that challenge, hell yeah, let's do it. I'm just saying if you keep being like, that doesn't make sense, probably because there's a bunch of other shit that undergirds this, you know?
Sure. So I guess this is a question that iCal, like I think posed to you like a few weeks ago, which is like how do you justify your axioms? Because this is a frustration that I had like in our previous conversation, which is why can't a person be property? And the answer is because a person can't be property because it's a fundamental axiom, right? Which fair enough, right? But I mean, it's literally like it's in the term. It's an axiom, right? It's a foundation. Like, so how do you justify this axiom?
So I wouldn't say that that's the axiom, right? The axioms that libertarians use are the non-aggression principle from a Rothbardian perspective, right? So first and foremost, the non-aggression principle. How is that? You could say that's an axiom. I would say that argumentation ethics solved that as an axiom. And so what we are left with in terms of axioms that are actually necessary for libertarianism is number one, the theory of human action, right? So this is the primary axiom for libertarianism as well as it is the primary axiom for Austrian economic theory. Are you aware of human action?
I am aware of it in the sense that I take action, but I'm sure you'll enlighten me in a moment.
It's fairly close. It's actually fairly close, right? It's kind of self-explanatory, but I just want so a theory of human action, right? Great book, should read it. Actually, maybe not. It's difficult, but human action is essentially this: man acts in their own rational self-interest always and forever. Now, man can lack information. You could make the wrong choice, right? You could do dumb things, for example, because you lacked information. But what your actions are describe what it is that you desired in that moment, always. And there are positive actions, there is negative action, but even a negative action is indeed the choice to not act. And so what we're saying is that one of the primary axioms of libertarianism is that man acts intentionally, and that those intentions prove what their desires, at least in that moment, were when they acted. And that those desires are not random, right? So this requires, for example, free will as an axiom that might undergird human action, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Free will. Okay, so a couple of different things. So bodily autonomy, I can break this contract. I might have to pay a price, but that's the point, right? I can never really sell my rights. I can never really give them up. It seems to me like
Well, they're not owned. Yeah.
they're not owned. You can't own yourself. You can't own. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't own yourself. Like you might pay a price, like a breaking. So, but you can't risk your bodily autonomy. So can I ask you a question then? So let's say I
Yeah,
chop
of
off my
course.
hand. I sell my hand off on the market. Okay. Someone buys my
Mm-hmm.
hand. Okay. It's not my hand anymore, right? Because I've sold it to someone else. It's now their property. I've
Yeah.
chopped my hand off, right?
Yeah. You've disconnected the mind and body and created a kind of a separate thing, which is no longer connected to the mind and body. And then you've sold said thing. You do it with like kidneys, for example. It's probably a better example because like that's someone might rationally sell a kidney. They're probably not
Right.
rationally selling their hand, right? But it's selling kidney because you have two of them, for some money is perfectly, I don't know that it's always reasonable, but it is something that you can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then rationally, couldn't I make the case then at least that like an embryo, let's say that's before it's had brain activity. So maybe just in the first couple of weeks, sperm meets egg, okay? It doesn't have any brain activity, right? It doesn't have, it literally can't do anything, right? There is no use, right? It's not a user at that point. So do you think it would be ethical for someone to sell their non-brain developed embryo? Do you think that would be something that could legally be acceptable?
No, I don't think it's
Why?
legally acceptable. Because I would say that bodily autonomy as a right is granted from the moment that it is a unique, distinct human. Now, where that comes from, you could say, well, it's not so much that I desperately, deeply believe that an embryo has these rights. It's that I've never heard a good argument against it. Because I've heard the consciousness argument, and it's like, okay, the problem with the consciousness argument is that it falls apart once we start talking about toddlers, right? So toddlers don't have rights, people in comas don't have rights, mentally ill people don't have rights. So like, it's not so much that I think that like, I don't have any, my default position has to be that it comes from inception when it becomes unique as a Bayesian inference, because we give those rights to the category of human beings, I think, based off of some level of potentiality. We recognize that even mentally challenged people may one day be cured. We recognize that even people in a coma may one day get up from their coma. And we recognize that they're distinct individual humans, and that the heuristic and all of the things, all of the beliefs that we have are based off of these individual rights as individual people. And so like, yeah, there might be a better argument for 8 weeks. I've never heard it. So that's where I draw my line. It's less strong than some of the other beliefs that I have. I will give you that.
So it's about the potential for it. And it's the potential for it to be a conscious living being, or is it the potential for it to be, I'm going to revert back to consciousness. That's what it's based off of?
So
Not off of
because I
adulthood,
believe,
mind
because I believe in argumentation ethics, right, as the grounds by which we bring about the non-aggression principle, then it comes from the capacity for argumentation. So it's not so much consciousness, because consciousness is felt in many, many, many forms, right? Every mammal, every animal in the animal kingdom has some level of consciousness. What it is argumentation. And so I'm talking about the potentiality for this thing that has been identified belonging to a category that has a reasonable potentiality, right? So, I wouldn't say that bonobos belong in this category. Even though, yes, is it technically possible that someone comes with a computer chip and makes a conscious bonobo? It's like, well, sure, then that thing would have bodily autonomy, maybe. But setting all that aside, it's about argumentation. It's about the capacity to be a moral actor. And in order to be a moral actor or a moral agent, whichever term you prefer, right, you have to be aware of the morality of your decisions. You have to be able to use your consciousness to say, it would be wrong for me to do A and it would be right for me to do B, and be able to universalize that. So that also requires artificial general intelligence as well, right? Like the universality of moral propositional claims. And so, yeah, so it's not just that they have some level of consciousness, because if that were the case, like, we would extend these rights to like nearly every species of life,
Right.
with the exception of like viruses, bacteria, some bacteria. Like even some bacteria might be considered conscious to some degree.
When you say moral actor or moral agent, you just mean the capacity to make moral decisions, right? That's all it
Yeah.
means. Very
Well, I mean that
simple
they have
moral.
some moral value, right? So there is a moral value ascribed to a moral actor. There is no moral value ascribed to a non-moral actor. They can't have a moral value ascribed to them because they
Because they
can't
can't.
be moral. They can't act
So then,
morally.
do you think that children are moral actors, or do you think they have diminished moral agency? It would seem at the very least you would say they would have diminished
Yes.
moral agency. No.
Yes, that's exactly my point. Is that like the if you use the argument that there needs to be some level of consciousness, right? The problem with that is that toddlers would fall into that same category, right? Like toddlers are less moral actors, moral agents, than a dog, right? Like a
Mhm.
dog is clearly like, and yet they're beginning to around 2, they're beginning to use their mirror neurons to establish roles, and they're beginning to get the concept of no. They're beginning to get the concept of right and wrong. And so, when they become moral actors based off of a certain level of consciousness is something we don't have enough knowledge in neuroscience to be able to determine currently when that breaking point or threshold is. But I would say is that we give it to them by default, by nature of them being human, just like we would do to mentally challenged people or people in a coma, right? Like these people are equally incapable of being moral actors, right? Like we recognize if someone's too mentally challenged, they don't know right from wrong. Hell, it's even a defense in criminal laws. You're too crazy to know, right? But that doesn't mean that you're not a moral agent. It just means that you're incapable of expressing, or incapable of exercising your status as a moral actor, because that status is gained by virtue of speciation.
So, a couple of things about that. So we give it to them by default by not we don't they have a diminished capacity for moral agency at the very least. In some cases barely, depending on how much. So, if that's the case, well, if it's about the potentiality, I mean, so like here's an example. So terminally ill toddlers. And we know for a
Mm-hmm.
fact that this toddler is going to die. There's no question. This is different from the coma
Well,
example because we know that
you can never
you
know
have
that.
no. Suppose that I grant you the ability that you do know it, though. Suppose that you
But
know
that
for
that
certain that.
what happens if you grant me the ability to know exactly what the future is requires that you take out free will. If you can know exactly what the future is, then free will no longer exists and the world is deterministic, because
I
the
understand,
future
but for
must
the
be.
sa-
No, but it's important. Actually, it's actually important when if you're going to bring up potentiality as a means of argumentation. If you're going to attempt to undercut potentiality by creating a deterministic world by definition, then it changes potentiality. Yes, but you're changing your definitions of the world. I already said that an axiom is girded by free will. And so if you take out free will from the equation, yeah, a lot of things change, because there is no morality anymore, because we're no longer responsible for our decisions, because it's possible for us to make decisions other than the ones we're predestined to make.
okay, so I'll modify it a bit. Suppose the doctor comes and they say, this toddler, this child, they have a 99% chance that they are not going to live in the next 6 months.
Right. Well,
So
there's a
in
one
that
percent
case,
chance.
so the fact that there's a 1% chance that they might someday become a moral actor or a moral agent means that they are a moral agent or that they have moral agency?
I know it's kind of crazy from the outside when you're philosophically left wing, because you're predominantly based upon consequences and percentages and empirics, right? So it comes down to like what is most likely true. But if you're going to critique more right leaning positions or libertarian positions or natural law positions, you're going to find that they are very, very often deontological in the way that they view the world. And that might be a culture shock to you, but yes, their deontological positions are, it's black and white. There's no wiggle room. There's no gray area. It either is or it isn't. It is a human. It has human DNA. Humans have rights. Well, they have one right, the right to bodily autonomy, of which all of the things we call rights stem from. And so the 1% is more than enough. The 0.1% is more than enough. They have a right to body by virtue of being human. Because if they don't, if we institute this gray area, then we have to reverse it. And then I have to start asking you questions. Well, when do humans lose their rights? When is it okay to start raping people? When is rape okay? Right? The deontologist says never. The utilitarian has to bite the bullet that at a certain point, rape is the greater good. And we just don't believe that. Libertarians don't believe that. Natural law people don't believe that. Christians don't believe that. For example, Christian ethics systems, right? Can't be a Christian and think rape is okay sometimes, so long as the greater good is right. You know what I mean? Like, but if you're a consequentialist, yeah, sure, it's okay to take the organs of 5 people and put them in one person.
I understand what you're saying, but the point, I'm not asking this purely from a consequence. I'm not. But the reason why I bring up the percentage is because I already tried to make it deterministic so that you knew for sure, absolutely the case that like this child is going to die, and you said that you
Right.
didn't want to engage with that because you didn't
Well,
want to engage.
I engaged. I absolutely
true,
engaged. I just said it changes the nature of reality, and therefore it changes the presuppositions of morality itself.
I was just trying to narrow it down, like to try to tack like what the principle was, because if
I'm
the
with you. I'm
principle
with you.
is, yeah, if the
I'm not
principle
accusing
is
you of
like
being bad
moral,
faith. We're in nitty gritty shit. Like I get that.
Mhm. Yeah. So okay, bodily autonomy. I can break this contract. Okay, you have bodily autonomy, and that's just a base principle that you have bodily autonomy because
Mhm.
and you might be able to break this contract. So you could sell yourself into slavery, but the contract is that you sell yourself into slavery and you can break that contract at any time. And you might be shot in the head, you might be tortured, terrible
Right.
things might happen to you, but
Yeah.
you can still choose to break that contract. Okay. Is that basically like what? Okay, just trying to make sure that I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, all things being equal, right? Assuming there's no coercion
Mhm,
involved, assuming there's no fraud involved, right? Like
mhm,
you do indeed when you sign a contract and you agree, and then
mhm,
you say, actually, I don't want to do that anymore. Obviously that's a bad thing. And so there's some form of clause written into a
mhm,
contract of like, well, what do you do when you no longer want to hold up your end into the bargain? In some instances, that's going to be, well, nothing, right? Like,
mhm,
like if you don't have a clause, then there's no real crime here other than potential restitution for what it took to replace you or to fix the problem you caused. It would depend upon the common law that is developed in your area more so than anything, right? So that's when it gets into the pragmatics of what your society set apart.
okay.
So yeah. So my question to you then, because there's been a lot of
Sure,
questioning of my positions, and I'm trying to
sure,
understand where you're coming
sure.
from. Maybe it'll help me better understand this. So like, do you believe in a right of bodily autonomy? Yes or no?
Uh, I'm gonna give you the very unsatisfying answer, which is that I don't know. I'm trying to discern. This is part of the reason why
Okay.
I had a bit of a frustrating answer for you on Monday. I'm just genuinely trying to figure out like what it is that I think on the like based off of like for right now, like based off of our conversation that we had on Monday. I think that the and we can get into this like this more. I don't know if I feel the same as I did previously, but I think that assuming that there are any axioms at all, that there is any axiom about I have the right to bodily autonomy, I have the right, and I know you didn't say this, I have the natural right to property, I have these natural rights. It sounds to me like a theological claim. I don't mean that like just that like it's
Hmm.
specifically from Christian ethics or
So
from any particular brand, but it sounds to me like you want it to exist because you want it to exist, because it would be nice for it to exist, which seems to me to fly in the face of like I'm sorry, many libertarian conversations that I've had before with you and with Lactoid. It's because the point of it, as you've stated before, is that this is supposed to be about principles first and pragmatism second, right? It doesn't
Okay,
matter if you don't like it if I have nukes in my backyard.
hold
I
on,
have the
hold on.
right to have those nukes, right?
Let's pick this apart a little bit. Okay, so in order for us to converse, we have to have axioms. Otherwise, language doesn't make sense. There are axioms that we hold true no matter what. Okay? So in English, right, those axioms would undoubtedly be Aristotelian formal logic. Do you agree or disagree?
Do I agree that the axiom upon which we are able to have a conversation is founded on Aristotelian formal logic? I'm gonna have to say
Yes.
no because I don't know what you mean when you say that. Like I don't
So
understand what you're saying.
so the three main laws of logic, right? So this would be number one, the law of identity. Okay? So the law of identity is I've done this multiple times, right? Because this is the most simple one, and I think it's probably the one that where we get the other two, which is this pen is this pen, right? This pen exists in the material world, right? And this pen exists not in a different world, right? that it exists in reality, and that we have the capacity via reason, via our sensory organs, whatever, to identify this as this pen and to be able to separate it in some capacity between this pen, right? That this is a white pen, this is a black pen. So we know that these are two separate identities and that there may share commonalities with, let's say, this pen, right? They share a lot of commonalities because they're manufactured as some part of the same product. And yet this pen is not this pen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you agree to that, right?
So you're basically what you're saying is that there is an essence to pen A that pen B does not possess, even if it's made of the
Right.
same materials, even if it has
Yeah.
the same ink.
So to formalize it, A equals A. That is one of the things that we agree to is that A equals A.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm with you, but that seems to be an observation
Is that
about
religious?
material. No, it's not religious, but the axiom that you're talking about seems to be an empirical observation about the world. It would be like me walking outside and saying, "This is a pine tree." All right, this rock is cold. It is because I can sense it and because I can see it and observe it out in the world and I can prove it to you,
Right.
right? But
But
that's
you
not a
agree.
moral axiom. That's just a
But
that's a fact about the world.
okay, I agree. I love that you are affirming that one of the axioms of which we have English language and that we're able to communicate are the laws of logic. If someone claims that A equals not A, right, which would be the law of non-contradiction, that A cannot equal not A, or that, right, or that P cannot equal Q, for example, so that contradictions by their very nature are not true. This is another one. And then the last one is the law of excluded middle. And the law of excluded middle is that for every proposition, for every claim, for every argument, there is a negation to the true, right? So if A doesn't, if X, if something is true, then there is a falsity to the true thing. There's a statement that would be false if there is a true, and vice versa. If this is false, this statement is false, somewhere out there is a statement that is true. It's a little bit more complicated than that law of exclusion, but I don't want this to become a course on fucking formal logic, right? These are axioms that we hold true, that we must hold true in order to have a conversation at all, right? Like in order to speak, we have to assume that the other person isn't saying things, that they're not saying A equals not A, that they're not saying things that are gobbledygook. This form of logic allows a sentence structure to be able to describe reality. These are axioms that we hold.
Mhm.
And so you wouldn't say that those are religious. You would say, well, those are derived from observation. The problem with that is that to say that they're derived purely from observation would in many ways be, I would have to break it apart to see what do you mean when you say that. Do you mean that they are derived from the rational mind, or do you mean that they are derived from oh my God, why can I not think? Empiricism. Sorry.
I'm basing it off of empiricism. I'm saying that like the reason like why you
Mhm.
could show me that that A does not equal A, that A equals A is because you can empirically prove to me that A equals A. It's literally I mean there's a reason you're using the
How do
Penn
you
analogy.
how do you ground empiricism?
How do I ground it? I
Mhm.
ground it because I use empirical facts and data to map onto the natural. That's the only
Circular.
way I can interact with
It's
the.
circular. You just gave me a circular grounding. You said I ground empiricism via empiricism. How do you
Oh, I
ground
see.
empiricism?
So are you asking like why I rely on empirical like proofs as
No,
opposed to
I'm
rational
saying
proofs?
right. Sure, but what I'm saying is if you believe that empiricism is how you ground formal logic so that we can have a conversation that doesn't have contradictions, that that we recognize there's a negation of truth and negation of falsity, and then we recognize that there things can be identified in the material world. If you're grounding, how do you ground that as a valid form of means testing formal logic?
Oh, I see. So I would say that so there are two different ways that you could go about this. So if I'm trying to verify if this pen really exists in the empirical in the material world, if I want to show, in fact, the contradictions if I want to go through and test whether or not each of these principles that you've laid down to me are actually true, I would want to see evidence. I would want to test it. I would want to see if that actually plays out and if it holds in the real world or if there are any exceptions to it. So I would look for empirical examples to try to back it up because I
But
think
that's
that
not
if you
it's not grounding it.
cling I understand that it's not grounding it, but it's proving it. You have a theory, you have a rationalistic theory, and you're trying to see if there's any
You're
evidence to prove
using
whether or not it makes sense.
right, but you're using empiricism. I'm saying, how do you know that empiricism itself is valid?
How do I know? I suppose my answer to you is I don't know, but it's the best that I have. That's my
Right.
real
So
answer to
hold
you.
on. You accused me earlier of saying that there was like some of these beliefs that you have that I have are seem
Mhm.
spiritual. They seem religious. They seem like they're taken on faith because they're axioms that ground things. And when I give you just a little teeny bit of pushback, what I find is that you believe in empiricism
Mhm.
more than you believe in Aristotelian formal logic. And you use empiricism as a means of grounding, use probabilities as a means of grounding logical truths in lieu of even using logic or rationality to understand things, and instead use it first. And when I ask you, how do you ground that really big axiom, you go, I don't know, it just kind of works for me. That sounds like a religious belief to me.
I don't know. I mean, my answer, I mean, how else can I access knowledge? How else can I test whether or not something actually works in the natural world other than
I
seeing if
agree.
there's any empirical like proof beyond it? Now, what you're saying, and I accept like what you're saying, but I would say to you as the response that what you have told me here, like the found that these things have to be true in order for us to have a conversation. Again, that seems to be an observation of how logically we are able to communicate, but it's not a moral principle. You're not founding any rights based off of,
No,
our
no, no, no.
ability to
I didn't. I'm
communicate in
not claiming
English.
that. I'm not
Well,
claiming.
but
I'm claiming. I'm claiming that those are necessary components for the things that I believe.
well, so
Because you
hang
wanted
on.
to go to axioms, so I go to axioms, right? I
Well,
start with,
so
existence
hang on.
exists.
Well,
Yeah.
I understand. So I understand, but that's an empirical observation you can make. It's also a rational conclusion that you can make, of course. But I don't know why you would derive any moral principles from it or any rights-based principles off of simply an observation that you can make about the world. You can say why something logically
Yeah.
you can
Well, we
logically say
haven't
you're
gotten
able to
there.
do something. Yeah, I understand. You can say so I mean, I can give you the rational reason why I'm able to speak English and why you are able to understand me, and we can go through the different reasons for that. But that's just an explanation of a function that I'm able to do, right? That doesn't
I agree.
explain why this function has anything to do with a right that coexists with it. Do you know what
Yeah. No,
am I
no,
making sense?
I agree. Like I was just baby
Mhm.
steps, right? Like we have to get there. Like I agree that I'm
Well,
not
but what I'm
saying,
saying
yeah, you're saying you haven't, I haven't walked you through how these two things are connected. I agree. I have not walked you through how those two things are connected. Agreed.
Well, okay. Well, I would just say that if you are going to tell me that bodily autonomy, this is an observation about the world in the same way that existence exists, this pen does not equal this pen, and uh, I am not sure if that necessarily. I'm not sure if that's true necessarily. I think it's true that you have control of your own body. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
true that, like, obviously, you do. If you can pick up, this
Let me
chapstick,
write
for
that
instance,
down
if you
because
can
that's a
play with.
really important thing. I appreciate that. Control of body.
Well,
So that's
obviously,
one of
you
the
can
steps we don't have
control
to
your.
go through.
Well, like, obviously, you control your body. I am able to control what I am able to do in the real world. But that's an observation of a function, of a capability that I have. That's not a statement as to whether or not I have a right to bodily autonomy. That's just a description of the
Yeah,
fact that I use and am autonomous. That doesn't mean, though, that I have any rights that stem from that.
I agree. Again, I
Okay.
haven't
Yeah.
explained
I
it.
just wanted to. Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
if you agree, if one agrees, we'll say, if one agrees that you need to follow formal logic in order to have conversations where the truth of things can even be evaluated or understood, where you're not saying gobbledygook, then you have to, at the very least, formally announce that at a minimum, you are also agreeing to the axiom of this formal logic. Like, I think it's a fact. You might say, well, I'm using empiricism to say that these things work. But one way or the other, you're agreeing when we're conversing that these laws of logic are the only way that we can communicate. That if we deny these laws of logic, that we can't communicate meaningfully. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So once that's there, then we recognize that contradictions can't be true because that's one of those. If A cannot equal not A, it's not possible for A to equal not A. Then there is Habermas's performative contradiction. Are you aware of Habermas's performative contradiction?
I can't say that I am. No.
So the easiest way to describe it is his best example because it's how he defeated postmodernism, right? Which is that the core principle of postmodernism is that truth is subjective, right? And so Foucault, Derrida, who else would it's not important to list all the fucking postmodernists believe this. Regardless, one of the key principles of postmodernism is that truth is subjective and that there is no one truth, that there are multiple truths that can exist and contradict, etc. And Habermas recognized, he said, well, if that's the case, the statement you're making is either true or false. Either it is true that there are multiple truths out there that can contradict, or it is false. And you believe this to be true, thus you are saying that this is an objective truth about reality. So either there's a contradiction because the statement that you're making is making the argument of P, and then the other statement is making the argument of not P, right? So one premise and not the other premise, P and not P. And so he's saying this is a performative contradiction because either it is true and there's a contradiction, so it can't be, or what you're saying you don't actually believe. You say that you believe it, but the words are a performance, like a court jester telling a joke. They're not meant to be taken as a serious argument. They're gobbledygook, meant to create laughter or entertain in some means. So this is a performative contradiction. Go ahead.
So as far as I want to pause right there because I don't know if that is entirely true. So I would agree with you that when you're reading a lot of postmodern texts such as Derrida or Butler or Foucault or Jean or any of these people, that it is true that.
Butler's a little different, but yeah.
Right. So my understanding of at least Butler's take is that it's not that, it's not that we're all courtroom jesters performing language. It's that it's the performance that makes it real. Just as like when you go, so this is an example for those of you who don't know in like the book, like when you go, like when a bride and a groom is married, what makes them the bride and groom? It is the performance of it's a quote unquote performance. It's not really the right way to say it, but it's because of the fact that they walk into the church, they sign the document, and the priest pronounces them, and now I pronounce you man and wife. It is
This is a
that
separate
which.
thing. I think
Well,
I think you're confusing Habermas saying performative contradiction before. I think it's before Butler, most of Butler's writings, anyways. But
well, I
Habermas
just
is.
wanted to.
Yeah, it's different. Like what he's saying, he's not saying that performance. Like what you're describing is the Thomas principle. Like it doesn't need to exist in material reality, but we all give it credence by pretending it exists or pretending it's real, and therefore it becomes real because its actions are real. It's the consequences of the performance of something that is abstract into reality, and the means by which people internalize that performance and act out based upon the assumption of truth or validity of said performance create real consequences in the world. That's not what he's attacking.
Okay, well, I understand, and it's not that I disagree with the principle that you've just stated. It's just that some of like when we were referring to postmodernists, I've just caught on like the edge of when you said performance, and I wanted to just to clarify that point
Yeah,
because
no,
I think it's
different things.
Yeah,
He's saying
I think
performative contradiction because it is a performance, because it can't be a true statement. So it must be something other than true,
mhm,
which is to say you're doing an act that isn't true.
mhm. Well, so I don't agree with this person, but like this was something that was actually critiqued in Jean Brickman and Alan Sokals. They wrote a book together. I think it was called Pseudo Intellectuals. It was published in France. Basically, like what it says, like as I understand it, many people who are, as you put it, like who are postmodern, like who are postmodern authors, who are postmodern thinkers, what many of them will say is that you as a person, like the way that you access truth is through your ability to talk to somebody else. It is through the principles of language, it's through the education that you have. And so everything that you know about the world comes through this prism. And because it's affected by this prism, and I don't know that I agree with this, but what they would say is that
It's
therefore
way
you
more
cannot
true for
have
French.
well, but you can't well, they would say that therefore you as a person cannot truly have access to whatever the objective truth is because however it is that you choose to enact it and choose to engage with it, you're necessarily going to have to go through a subjective veil in order to access it. So,
If you don't like my characterization of saying he defeated the postmodernists because there are elements of postmodernism that you believe have given some should or ought to be given some credence in the movement of things, like especially like maybe let's say its influence on Karl Popper or something. Right, that's
mhm.
fine. That's not the important part here. It's a distraction from the concept of a performative contradiction, right? Which is to
Well,
say I can do a totally different one. I can do a totally different one, right? Which is to say, you say, I do not enjoy smoking cigarettes. I hate the idea of smoking cigarettes. I'm not addicted to cigarettes in any capacity. And I recognize that it's wrong to smoke cigarettes. And I would never choose to smoke a cigarette. And then you pull out a Marlboro, you light it up and you smoke a cigarette. That's a performative contradiction. Your actions and shown through your beliefs, I can believe one thing and you're doing something that proves that the other thing that you said must be false.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to give some context to some of these thinkers, just to clarify, because I agree with it. And it's not that I agree with what, especially Lucy or Gary, like with many of what these authors have claimed, especially in regards to the rhetoric, like especially like rhetoricians of science. I'm especially critical of that. But I do think it's important to clarify precisely what it is that they're saying. And as I understand what they're saying is you can't have access to what you're really looking at because you're going through the subjective lens. That's what they're saying. I don't know if that's really true or not, but that's the claim.
Look, if you want to have a conversation about postmodernism, I have a lot of disagreements. I don't know. I think often their positions were hyperbolic way too far and just incorrect, but they were touching on some element of truth, right? Foucault specifically in starting this, especially when talking about the French language. Because, if you look at the limitations of the French language, they are, if in English, if we don't have a word for something, we'll just make up a fucking word for it. Right. Like, so it doesn't really apply to English. It kind of applies to French because they're very married to their language. And so, it's almost taken an American influence to start forcing the French to create new words, right? Computadora or something, or you know what I mean? Like it's like, okay, we'll fucking take your word for this new thing. And they'll do it with nouns, but even then they won't do it with concepts and ideas. Whereas we have Shakespeare. Right. And so the dude invented like 18,000 words because he was like, there's not a word for this. Fuck it. I'll make a new word. It's eyeball. I don't like fucking the orb that is contained within the ocular cavity. It's too wordy. It doesn't get to it. We all know what an eyeball is. Eyeball. Right. Like English is a little different. We can have that conversation. The point is understanding the performative contradiction, right? So if we understand that contradictions are bad, and we understand that performative contradictions hold the same space in the validity of an argument, that is when we move into argumentation ethics. And argumentation ethics does not bridge the ought-is gap. I used to believe that it did. I don't think that it does. There's some that believe that it does. And this was what you were bringing up earlier when you were saying just because I'm describing the is of reality doesn't mean that I gain this moral axiom of bodily autonomy as an ought. And I disagree slightly, which is to say that I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily give you a moral imperative to not violate someone else's bodily autonomy. But what it does do is that I can observe and know your bodily autonomy and know its existence. I can know that you and you alone have control over your body. And I can know that when you make moral propositional claims, they must be universalizable. And that when you're engaged in argumentation and you're arguing, you're respecting my bodily autonomy and you're establishing norms of conflict avoidance. And when you argue in favor of aggression, that is where the performative contradiction comes in. And so does that give you an ought? Actually, it doesn't. It only gives you an ought if you believe that you must be logically consistent. If you don't believe that you must be logically consistent and that you can say gobbledygook, well, then I can't communicate with you. You're an outsider to any ethical system that could exist because you cannot maintain, obey, be a part of, or argue in favor or against any form of ethics because you're no longer logically consistent. You're a threat to me. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one cannot violate the non-aggression principle. So the right of bodily autonomy, as is described, then becomes if one wishes to be logically consistent and if one wishes to advocate for any form of ethics, then one must recognize the right of bodily autonomy, and from that comes the non-aggression principle and private property rights. That is the actual argument once you go through it. Is not per se that right is perfectly extant. It's only that right is extant so long as you attempt to make an ethical framework that is logically consistent.
Okay, so a couple of things. So again, this goes back to the user thing that I mentioned before, right? And I think this is maybe this is the key thing that I want to get into, the unique, distinct human, right? Uniquely, distinctly human, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just mean that it has a separate body of its own, right? I know it intuitively seems obvious that like a fetus
Well, it's body and mind, right? Even if that mind is yet to be developed, right? Via potentiality, right? That the uniqueness there is also that it has its own mind. So I mean, like, even a clone, if a clone disagrees with its clone's forebear, right, it would still have some rights there because it has its own body and its own mind. Now, you would say, but it has the same DNA as the other clone. The DNA is really just a means by identification of the unique body and mind, the unique person that is being created. It's not per se that the DNA itself is unique. It's just this is how we identify it as a unique thing.
Right, and I'm not saying that it doesn't have a unique DNA code, but what I am saying is unique, and so the uniqueness of it is not exactly what I'm saying is if it's a distinct human, it's unique and distinct. Okay, so those are two different things. So is it unique? So the first part of it is like for the moment it is a unique, distinct human being. Not even a human being, a human, right? So
well, a unique, distinct moral agent or thing that belongs to a category of species that are moral agents or actors. As of right now, the only one that we can prove are humans. But like an aliens could come by, right? Like it wouldn't need to be a human. It could be an alien and still have rights.
Okay, so again, so I'm with you here. So the right to bodily autonomy. So if you want to be logically consistent, and if you want to have a system of ethics that is logically consistent, you therefore have to respect bodily autonomy and follow the non-aggression principle. Is that basically what you said? I just want to be very clear.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay, so there are a couple of things. So first of all, as to the status of an embryo being a unique, distinct agent, I don't know if that's necessarily true, and I don't think that it's true, again, for what I stated earlier, right? In order for something
Why?
to be why? Because it's the combination of you and another person's, genetic material, and that's different from the clone example, because the clone example that you gave is just that we just both happen to have the same DNA. That's not what I'm
Okay,
saying. What I'm saying is that you
it's not
use your
it's its
resources.
own person. You're saying it's no longer unique or distinct. It's no longer its own person. How?
I'm not saying it's not its own person. What I'm saying is it's It's not unique in this if it for it to be truly unique, it would have to be beamed down from Mars, okay? Would have to have no influence from anyone whatsoever in the related vicinity. It couldn't be the
I
result
mean,
of a
yeah,
sexual
sure. I
act.
mean,
That's
maybe
what I mean.
distinct is probably a better word, or discrete, maybe even better than unique here. I think you know what I mean by unique, but like, yeah,
I d
I'll take that critique. It's fine.
Well, what I mean by that is, so if it's the case, so I don't know that it's entirely unique. In order for it to be distinct, that simply means that it's separate, correct? That just means that it's a separate body that's separate DNA,
It's a
separate
separate
from.
individual. Yeah, like the uniqueness in terms of the fact that it has a genetic code that it inherits from both
Mhm,
parents. That's not my argument doesn't hinge upon that in any way, right? It's just as you mentioned with the postmodernist philosophy, right? It's just the language
mhm.
and the attempt
Right,
to communicate what I mean via the language. I don't want to get
right.
into a semantics about unique because I'm not married to it. If you want to use distinct or discrete, that's fine.
Mhm.
That's not the argument. The argument isn't because of its DNA being completely original, therefore it's original. It's that it is its own body. It inhabits itself. It will develop its own consciousness. Untrammeled by tragedy, if you will. It has the potential, and it is a discrete, we'll say,
Well
human being.
well, but that's so I acknowledge, of course, that, like, a fetus is a separate entity from the mother, but what I'm saying but as whether or not it's distinct or discrete, I don't even know if that's true, and I don't know that that's true because, I mean, this is why we got into the back and forth of whether or not something grows itself. You could make this I could make if I go out into my front yard, I have a seed. I plant the seed in my front yard. Technically, the orange grows itself, but because it's on my land and because I am watering it every day and because I put fertilizer around the soil and it grows, it is my
We're
tree, right?
we're getting back
Correct?
to silliness, right? Like the orange is not a person, right? Like you're isolating. And I don't like when people do this. It seems bad faith. I'm not saying you're doing it in bad faith. It seems bad faith. It might just be a habit, right? But when you isolate variables apart from the rest of the argument in order to attack them one by one, when the argument requires the combination of them, I think is disingenuous. Obviously, an orange is not a person because we're talking about a person. We're not talking about oranges. It's not just that they grow themselves. It's that they
Right, but
are a human being that will be a moral actor. Oranges
I
won't.
understand. I understand, but, like,
Hmm.
the reason why I'm going to oranges is, right, is because we're talking about why we care if it's a moral agent, why we care if it's a moral actor, why we care, and you're saying it's because it's unique and distinct, and I'm challenging its uniqueness and distinctness because, A, I don't think that the baby doesn't grow itself, number 1. So I don't know that it's
Hmm.
distinct, okay? I think you could make the case that the parents grow it. They grow it through the by the sheer first of all, by the sheer fact that, like, the mother doesn't choose to abort it, by the fact that, like, it
Is
has to
this
be
true of
connected.
anything? When you say like your argument seems to be hinging upon this capacity that it needs resources to grow.
Mhm,
So, is there anything in our material world that you can think
mhm.
of that doesn't require some form of outside influence, either from
No, no,
humans, right? So
no,
your
but
conception
that's the
here
but that actually is my critique of that's
is that
why I
human
bring the
beings need to drink water, therefore God owns them because he made the skies rain. I don't understand.
No, what I so again, we're zooming out to, like, the beginning of this conversation. The internal critique that I'm offering
Hmm.
you is that libertarianism, it seems to be claiming that, like, individual rights in the face of collective ownership in the face of the state, right? Correct? Like, that's the main draw of libertarianism, is that's the defense of the individual against the you have these rights as an individual
That's
separate from everyone else.
that's a rhetorical thing. Like I don't know what is or isn't the most. the best draw to true libertarianism. That might be the best draw of right-wing populists to libertine individuals, but I don't know that that's the best draw to actual libertarians. But that's fine. Like it's not relevant to the conversation, I don't think.
Well, the reason I'm going down the child slavery hypothetical is because actually, as strange as it seems, I actually think that, like, down this line of thought, it actually creates a very wacky justification for collective ownership of people, and that people, in
Right.
fact, don't have
But
ownership.
only
They don't have
because
bodily
you're
autonomy.
creating your own justifications within the system. Like you're adding in things that we
Right,
don't
but
believe and
right,
going, actually, you must
right, but
believe
I,
this.
but
And then
I'm,
I go,
but I'm,
why? And you go, because oranges grow themselves.
right, but I'm
Don't grow
trying.
themselves. Sorry.
But that's why I'm trying to discuss, like, what you said, which is whether or not it's a unique moral or
I,
unique
I
distinct
also want
moral
to point
issue.
out, just for the record, that you openly advocate for state ownership and state slavery of children. Like you openly advocate that the state ought own children in some capacity and demand that they not have a bodily autonomy.
Well, I can explain, like, if I can finish, like, explain, like,
Yeah,
so
it's
first of all,
fine. It's fine. I just,
I
want to
don't
point that out, like while you're
I
critiquing me
don't
for that,
well
that
I
like you
don't own
openly do so.
well I don't first of all I don't advocate for state ownership of children. I don't believe in slavery. But
Yes,
the
you do.
reason I don't believe in that, actually. I'm
We
trying to
did that on the
explain.
Well,
last
So
panel.
let her finish. Let her finish, please.
okay, so you say that I do, right?
Mhm.
This was your response to me when I accused libertarianism of being a pro-slavery position, right? But this is what I think of as of right now, which may change in the future, which is that because of the fact that it goes down this the only place where the only way you can justify having set of individual rights truly is through social contract theory. It is you have individual rights because you
No,
exist within a society that creates those rights, has decided on what those rights are, and that's how you justify having a set of individual rights.
no.
Otherwise, I think otherwise you can turn to spirituality or to a religious justification for why you have those rights, or B, you wind up in this really weird delve into a sort of bioethical socialism where everyone in some weird way collectively owns everyone, and therefore you don't even own yourself, and in fact nobody else around you owns themselves
You're
either or
doing that
anything
dive.
else. So
You're doing that
that's
dive. It's silly. You're not like you're not substantiating this. I'm like I have no problem teaching you libertarianism, and that's fine. That's what we've been doing most of this conversation. But it seems like you've learned enough now to try and find a way to force socialism and collective ownership into it, and because
well, I'm trying
but
to,
you're
but
not doing so. It's
I'm
it's it's
trying to,
it's not working because it's not
I'm
there.
listening. I'm listening. I'm listening to you. So again, like I will engage like with our conversation that we've had, but the
Mhm.
premise of this conversation before I walked in here was if you own yourself, okay, you own everything
Which you
about
don't.
yourself. Okay, I know you don't, but I'm just explaining, right? So
Mhm.
if you own yourself, I truly own everything about me, then that means I own my genetic material. It means I own my eggs. It means that my spouse, he owns his sperm. And that means that when we come together to create something,
Why are you
that means
why are you continuing this logic? I don't understand. I say
I'm
we
trying to
don't believe
explain.
that, and I
I
give you the
I under
entire justification as to why
I
we don't
know, but
believe it. And
I'm
then you go,
trying to explain.
yes, but if you posit this thing that you
Yeah,
don't
I understand,
believe,
Scott.
then I can
I'm
show
trying to
how
That-
your
explain
belief
why,
would be
Scott.
socialism.
Hey,
Yeah.
let her finish. Let her finish, please. Go ahead.
So what I'm trying to say is,
Mhm.
so if it's the case that so if we got to the place where you believed that, if it's true that I own my child is my property, then
Right, which I don't
that
believe.
means I know you say that, but if that's something that I believe, then here's where it gets even wackier, right? Not only do I own my child, but my parents necessarily
Why
they
are
own
we going
me,
here?
and they own.
You're
I'm
what do you mean this is
explaining
where it gets
why.
wacky? No, but you keep saying
We're not ever
if you
gonna get there if
accept
you keep
my
interrupting me, Scott.
worldview
Scott,
and
Scott, Scott,
you
Scott, Scott. Look,
accept that
look,
I believe
Hey,
these things,
hey,
I don't
Scott,
believe these
Scott.
things.
guy, come on. We gotta. So she's driving to a point. Let her drive to that
She's
point,
been
and then
driving
at
to a
the end
point
of
for long enough, and it's all based upon
yeah,
me
but
not believing
Scott,
something.
Scott.
you keep interrupting her. So let her just get to that point, and then we'll go from there, right? And then you can
Okay,
demolish her, please.
was no demolish. I just don't believe it, and
I
that
Fair
understand.
enough.
everything
I'm
hinges
trying to.
upon that.
I'm trying to.
Fair
I'm
enough.
trying.
Fair enough. Let her draw it out, and then you can tell why it's wrong,
Okay,
please. FQ.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is if you believe that you have a fundamental right to property that is natural, that is separate from the state, And if you justify it by either claiming investment of labor or the first user principle, then by that logic, every person who has ever lived is a piece of property owned by someone else. That's the natural consequence, which means that the right for you to make decisions, the right for you to do anything within the society in which you live is absurd. You don't have individual rights, and you don't have individual rights because you don't have self-ownership. Nobody around you has self-ownership, which means any decisions or rights that you have or ability for you to exist is necessarily decided collectively by the people that own you, quote unquote. That's the point. That's why I think it really weirdly winds up into a socialist territory.
Okay, so you changed it there at the end that if you believe in first user principle, right, then all human beings are owned collectively. The problem here is, again, you tried to borrow another argument that you're not quite getting. The problem is that the first user principle does not give second comers or late comers rights over property, which is what you're attempting to justify. What you're attempting to justify is the very thing that first user was used to attack, which you would know if you had ever actually read any of it, which you haven't, and that's okay. The entire portion of first user is to say that second users don't have rights to property.
Well,
Your claim is that second users do, because the parents would be second users.
Well, it's not just that. It's that it's not simply that you're a second user. It's that if you as the parent own your child, that means not only do you own, but if you do, then that means that you own everything that the child owns as well, meaning that you own their genetic material too. It's not about
Sure, that's fine. I don't agree to that. I don't agree that you own children. I've said that.
Well, but
I've never even hinted at that.
But the reason why I'm going back on this is because you're saying using the second user, second person that shows up. That's
the
not
parent is the second user. The child is the first comer. The child is themselves. We were talking about their body. They're the one, they have their own body. The latecomer would be the parent trying to gain control over the body. You're saying, well, they created it. Well, no, sure, yes, they created it by combining it with this other thing, and this created this discrete new thing, and this new thing creates itself. And you're saying, well, oranges don't create themselves because they need water.
It's not just that it's not simply, I mean, I use the resource as an analogy. It's not just that you have a resource that you combine with somebody else's resource. It's that the resource that you are combining with is you, okay? You are combining yourself,
right?
Your
and
egg
if I
with
believed in
body.
if I believed in the Lockean proviso, which I don't believe, which I explained later, right? That if that something becomes yours by virtue of the product of your labor, as opposed to the first comer principle. Right? If I believed in that, you might have some argument there, which is why it's a bad argument, which is why I said it's a heuristic that libertarians use, and you're attacking a heuristic to go against the argument itself.
No, what I'm saying is your egg is you. You are using your egg. You are the first user of your egg. And the fact that you are the fact of your first use of this egg that is yours, then consequently create something else, has nothing to do with whether or not you are the first person to use it. That's what I'm saying. As far as I agree, you're not.
The baby, right, is not property. Why is the baby not property? Because the first user principle is one of unhomesteaded property. That is, I go out into the woods and no one has ever used this portion of woods ever before. It is woods that just exist via trees. No conscious being has ever laid claim to it. I then embroider these woods by intersubjectively communicating to all others that these are my woods and I plan to use these woods to my desire. The baby cannot be homesteaded because the moment that the baby became a thing that was a discrete baby, it became a user. It doesn't matter how it was created. The trees, for example, are not the property of the tree. The acorn tree is not the property of the mother tree that dropped an acorn. It is its own thing. It doesn't own property because it can't justifiably own property because it's not a moral actor. The creation of said new moral actor it cannot be property of the parent because in its very creation, it created a thing that has that right to bodily autonomy.
And again, I think that I'll go back to like what I stated earlier, which is that you can't do this. You can't say that you have a right over this thing because it creates itself and it has its own right to bodily autonomy. But again, that sounds to me like an assertion. That sounds to me like an assertion of you want, again, that sounds like, I know we've discussed this before, and you're saying that this is
Mhm.
a logical axiom, and like I'm getting this more. Let me go back to like my notes here for a minute, but like this, I understand like why you're saying this. Okay,
Let me
you're
try a
saying
different way. Let me
if
try a
one
different way.
wants
I
to,
think we're
well, hang on,
stuck on this.
let me go through this again. So you said right to bodily autonomy if you want to be logically consistent, okay, and
Mhm.
if you want to
Yes.
have a logically consistent system of ethics, that right, therefore, you have the right to bodily autonomy. That's what you're saying, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, and the
Yes.
basis for it, okay, so here's my, and again, we're going to the postmodern. What does it mean for a system to be ethical? So that's a question right off the bat, right? What does it mean? Because
Yeah, that's where I
I
want
could
to go.
offer,
I want to
yeah,
go there.
yeah,
I want to go there.
right, right. But just a couple of things. So one, what does it mean for there to be an ethical system, right? I don't agree that every system is ethical or different or cultural or whatever that is. I don't believe like in I don't believe in cultural relativism, right? I think that if you have to have a system of ethics, it should be something that is consistent, right? I would like that to be true. However, we have to face the fact that I could offer you an ethical system that would be excoriate people, that would abuse people. It might not be a ethical system under which people flourish, but it would be an ethical system, right? So if I
Well, it
offered
would be
you
invalid.
Dexter's,
It would be invalid and therefore not true.
well, it would be evil. I don't know that necessarily it would be invalid. I don't
It would be
know,
invalid.
like,
That
why
is my
though.
claim.
Like,
Well,
okay, well,
I'll get into it. So what is
okay.
so okay. So what is conflict? What do you think conflict is?
It's when two people have a disagreement.
Yeah, but specifically they have a disagreement. Conflict arises when they have a disagreement on how to utilize scarce resources towards opposing means, right? Because like if I disagree with you um on like whether or not the sky is blue, we don't really have a conflict because you're only choosing to have a conflict if you want to argue with me about whether or not the sky is blue. The moment that you want to argue with me about whether or not the sky is blue, you're trying to use scarce resources towards opposing means. The scarce resource in question would be my thoughts, right? I believe something that's wrong, and you want to disabuse me of this notion, right? You want to prove to me that just like my eyes, the sky is fucking blue. You're being stupid, right? Like I know my eyes are blue. Look at my eyes. Okay, now look at the sky. See how they're the same color, right? Like you're trying to. That's where the conflict arises. If you choose to not care any longer, then you leave, right? And it doesn't matter. The conflict is resolved because you no longer care. So when you have a conflict, and it's better if we use it with material possessions. So Rob and Crusoe are stranded on a desert island. And there are some sticks that can be used either to make rafts or they can be used to make fishing poles, right? So Rob grabs a stick and decides he's going to turn it into a fishing pole because he wants to eat. And Crusoe later, the second user, comes and says, I need that stick in order to build the raft. Now we have a conflict. We have two people that want to use the same stick, but they want to use it for different things. This is the reason why collective ownership cannot be valid. Because it's conflict inducing, because it's not possible for Rob and Crusoe to both use the stick towards their project. One of them has to win. It's not possible that Rob can whittle the stick down so that it's more bendable and pliable to use as a fishing rod, and at the same time that now whittled down stick can be used as a raft, because if it's whittled down, it no longer can be used as part of the raft. And so one of them has to win. Now we can engage in argumentation and have a debate about it, and hopefully one of us agrees and the conflict is resolved. Or one person can use violence. Might makes right. Crusoe can beat the shit out of Rob until he's almost dead and then take the fucking stick. Okay? Or again, there is argumentation. Someone gives up, argumentation, violence. Now, fraud, I would say, is some form of violence, but you can put that in a fourth category if you so choose. Now, this is where conflict arises, and an ethical system is designed to reduce conflict, to give rules as a means of circumnavigating conflict. Would you agree that an ethical framework is one such that it gives rules by people to live by so that we reduce conflict?
Mm, I think it seems intuitively obvious, but I'm not sure. I mean, so I'll defer back to religion and spirituality. There are like ethical systems I can think of where you have an ethical principle or you're commanded or ordered to do something that doesn't necessarily come into conflict with other people, but it has to do with keeping yourself healthy. So, for instance, you're not allowed to eat
Mm-hmm.
pigs, right? So, restrictions, so dietary restrictions, for instance, that's an example. It's a religious principle, right? Now, what is that really about reducing conflict between you and between your community? I don't know that it is. I think it's more about the reason it's more about keeping yourself healthy and purifying yourself so that you don't accidentally hurt
I
yourself. That's
agree.
the principle behind that.
No, I agree that ethical frameworks can have in them rules that govern what the society believes to be right and wrong that don't pertain to conflict over scarce resources, right? I mean, technically they kind of do in the sense that humans are scarcer, but that's neither here nor there, right? I agree that they can have those other things. What I'm saying is for an ethical system to be valid, it needs to engage with rules for conflict. And that if those conflicts are conflict inducing, right, they're designed to create conflict, then the ethical system isn't a valid ethical system. If the ethical system is one that creates problems as opposed to solving problems in the frame of rules, it's very clearly dysfunctional and dysgenic in some capacity.
So here's a question for you. So if we're talking specifically about conflict and how to resolve conflict, so I don't disagree with you that that is the function of an ethical system, that it gives you a method by which to resolve conflict, right? To how to face conflict, how to reduce. But I don't even necessarily know does it necessarily reduce conflict? Like, aren't there ethical systems that you could adopt that in fact make you more contentious, perhaps, and more hated within a society? I'm keep going and I keep borrowing from religious traditions. Like this
Well,
is
that wouldn't be conflict inducing from the ethics, though. The ethics wouldn't be what would be conflict inducing there. What would be conflict inducing is the lack of other people adopting your ethical framework. Other people have some other opinion that they want to conflict, that they want to aggress upon you, right? That's the invalidity of their ethical framework. If your ethical system is unpopular, right, as is mine, obviously, right, right, and it's unpopular, and I get hate DMs, right? Like that's not because my system is invalid. That's just because people are shitty and they want to send hate DMs because they don't like me, because they don't want to, I don't know, engage with
you're
my arguments as they are.
Well, I agree with you, right? Like that doesn't necessarily mean that the ethical system you have is bad or is invalid just because everyone hates you around you, right? And I agree with you, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if the point of an ethical system is to reduce conflict, it can't
Mm-hmm.
simply be to reduce conflict with like I'll just use you with other libertarians like who like you want to have these conversations with. It has to be to reduce conflict with everyone across the board. So if you're somebody who's so
Yes,
again
I agree.
spiritual yeah, so if I'm Catholic, right,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's just as wrong for a non-Catholic to have an abortion as it is for me to have an abortion because it has to be on that same principle regardless of whether or not you're a believer or not, correct?
Well, yeah, that's a
Like,
moral belief. That's not per se an ethical system
well,
that pertain to the
fair enough,
ethics. Yeah.
but yeah, but the point still stands, right? That it's about
Yeah.
reducing conflict for everyone that you interact with, not just for people who are within your circle that accept
Right.
your system of
So
ethics.
this is where you get the difference between morals and ethics, right? Is that you can look at something and say this is morally wrong, but an ethical framework is a structure by which at least 3 people agree to, right? So it must be 3 people. In order for the ethics to be valid, it must be 3 people. Because if it's 2 people, then there's no observer, right? And so it has to be at least person A, person B, observer in order for an ethical system to be valid. And it has to be conflict reducing. If it's conflict inducing, sure, you can adopt it, but it's not a system of ethics. What it is it's a system of conflict inducing rules that you've agreed to follow that is dysgenic and will eventually fall apart via some form of game theory, right? Because it requires coercion and it requires violence in order to maintain the dysgenic system. And if it requires coercion and requires violence against unwilling participants, it is by its very nature illogical, because it's violating that very same principle of argumentation, which is conflict reduction is argumentation. The moment that you engage in conflict reduction, you automatically create the moral principle that it is preferable for you to engage in honest conversation and to attempt to convince me of your position via honest conversation, as opposed to using violence and lies. And if that moral principle is universalizable, then in order for you to be logically consistent, you accept that you ought not aggress upon people, that you ought not use people's bodily autonomy and try and force them to agree to things that you want to agree, so long as they're not also doing the same thing to you. The very fact that we're debating right now is you agreeing that you want to change my opinion, or at the very least change the audience's opinion via some form of entertainment or whatever. Unless you're lying about that, right? Which I don't think you are. Like, I assume you're being honest that there's not fraud here. And you're agreeing that you don't want to use violence, because if you and me get into a fight, I'm not trying to be a dick and I got problems, but I'm a 6'5" dude. It's probably not going to work out unless you bring a gun, right? Like it's going to, like, we don't want to fight this out.
But see, I'll respond to that. So there's a third possibility though, which is that I'm not trying to necessarily convince the audience. And I don't know necessarily if I'm trying to convince you. It might simply be that I'm trying to explore an idea to see what I think about it, to try to see like what my own internal like
Right.
worldview is.
So the
which is
conflict
another
there,
option.
right? The conflict is you want to learn, and in the process of wanting to learn, you choose argumentation as a means of learning to resolve said conflict, as opposed to fraud, other forms of violence, or just giving up. The principle is the same. Even if you're not necessarily trying to convince me, you're still recognizing my autonomy by engaging with that. Now, yes, if you genuinely believe that no one is malleable here, and that you're not trying to convince a single person to change their opinion, it might not be argumentation in that regards, but then it's an internal conflict, and it doesn't matter towards ethics anyways, because we're talking about you just kind of using me as a tool to resolve an internal conflict. And I'm giving I'm affirming nonviolence. You're not necessarily affirming nonviolence in an ethical way, but it doesn't really matter because you're not actually arguing for anything. You would argue for things throughout this debate anyways, and you have. So, you know what I mean? So, kind of just is.
Well, I just wonder, so like when we ask like what a conflict is, like you're saying that like it's how to utilize scarce resources over opposing views. And specifically, I want to like hone in
Opposing
on
means,
what
but yeah.
opposing means. Okay. So opposing means, not opposing views. Okay. So
Yeah, because you want to use the same thing to do different things, and that's impossible.
Mhm. Well, so there are a couple of things. So number one, so conflict doesn't necessarily have to be over resources. And getting into a fight with someone
Can you
might
name one?
not necessarily. Okay, you're in a bar, you're drunk, and you get into a fight about whether Donald Trump, I don't know, whether Donald Trump should be elected to be the next president. Okay. Now,
Yeah,
and
that's a
you,
scarce resource.
but is it though? I don't know that it is,
The scarce
because
resource is the opinion the other person is holding. Like, they can only hold one opinion in their mind. You demand that opinion change to what it is that you want. So they want to believe one thing and you want to believe a different thing. The scarce resource is their opinion of Donald J. Trump, one way or the other. And then you're willing to get into a fight to try and stop them from believing what it is that they believe, as opposed to just walking away and accepting that they own their body, they own their opinions, and their opinions are whatever their opinions are, and you're not going to change their opinions, so walk away. You could walk away. You could engage in argumentation to try and convince them, hey, here's 10 reasons why I don't like Donald Trump, and here's the actual evidence, like, you should look at it. And then maybe they change their opinion, or you get into a fucking fist fight and you use violence, or, like I said, the fourth option, use fraud, and you start making up shit, and you start feeding them drinks, and they're so drunk and you keep making up shit that they believe what you want them to believe anyways, based off of all the lies that you told them.
So in that case, like, so again, let's go back to the definition of conflict, which is how to utilize scarce resources. Okay, so fair enough. So maybe somebody else's opinion or mind might be a resource. But suppose, for instance, so I don't know,
That's
like
the
suppose
basis for intellectual property, right? Like obviously the mind is a scarce resource.
Well, but let's interrogate that though. So let's suppose again you're drunk. Or some guy is drunk in a bar. He wants to argue that Donald J. Trump go MAGA, okay? And he is and he just so happens to be in a really pro-Trump bar, okay? Tons of MAGA hats there, okay? Tons of people who are in the area who are very right wing, who are pro MAGA, okay? And there's
Sure.
one dude that walks into the bar, okay, that hates Donald Trump. He's pro Biden. He sits down next to him, okay? And this guy gets into a fist fight with blue-haired guy in order to argue that Donald J. Trump is the best doggone president there's ever been. Is it a scarce resource at that point? It's not scarce anymore because the majority opinion of that community is pro-Trump at that point. So it wouldn't be a scarce resource. So is it just, and it's a henpecking point, but if it's just how to utilize resources over opposing means, I mean, we can go to that, but the scarcity of it doesn't
No,
necessarily
it's still a
seem to hold
scarce
true.
resource because it's only one person's opinion. Like other people can share a similar opinion. That's fine, right? Reputation is in a scarce resource because it's held in the individual mind of each individual person. Like you're saying, because multiple people have the same opinion, it's no longer scarce. Well, but it's still only Todd's opinion. Todd's opinion is scarce, right? Other people may have the same or differing opinion than Todd, but there's only one opinion that is Todd's. And that's the one that you want to fucking argue with and start a fight over. I say fucking like not as like a means of being mad. I'm just saying because I'm in the spirit of the bar fight, right? But it's like Todd's opinion is distinct in that.
Well, okay. So I guess under that. So like just to clarify for those that are watching. So suppose for instance you are, I don't know, let's say you're in Beverly Hills, okay? You're in a neighborhood of millionaires, okay? And there's one person that lives down the road that is in the poorest, that's in a really poor house, okay? It's not well established, okay? He doesn't make a lot of money, okay? So me, like the queen of Beverly Hills, Lisa Vanderpump, I go to this person's house. Everyone else is super wealthy, but then I go and I rob this guy of all of his stuff, right? That's not a scarce, it's still a resource I'm taking from him, but it's not a scarce resource. I have plenty of money. You're saying it's a scarce resource because it's Todd's house, even though
how much money exists in the world?
I have no idea. I mean,
right, but you would agree that there is a finite amount of gold in the world, right?
Of course, but like that's not what
that
we're
makes
talking
it scarce.
Okay, so the fact that it's finite. Okay, so I'll
so we don't live we don't live in the Star Trek utopia, right? Where material can be made from nothing.
Yes, I understand that.
So there are rich people and there are poor people. Well, why? Why do poor people exist? Well, because of scarcity. Because there's only so much things that exist currently, unless they're built in some capacity. There's only so much carbon. There's only so much precious metal. There's only so much things, right? If there was an infinite amount of sticks on the island to make a raft with or to make a fishing pole with, right? And sticks required not even a thought, just the moment that you desired a stick, the stick popped into your hand, then there would be no conflict over the stick on the island, right? Because the moment he desired a stick, boom, he had a fishing pole stick in his hand. And the moment he desired a raft, boom, it was in his hand. There was never a desire to use Rob's stick because the way the world worked for whatever reason made it impossible. Because there are finite sticks, it doesn't matter if there are 100 sticks on the island. Rob needs 100 sticks to make a raft. 99 sticks don't make a raft. He needs that stick. And Crusoe needs a stick of the 100 to make a fishing pole. And so they're scarce. It doesn't matter that Rob has the other 99 sticks and the other guy only has one stick. Going and stealing that stick is still a scarce resource that you want to use for opposing means.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the collective. So that makes sense. So how to utilize finite resources with opposing views. That makes a little.
And that's basically what every economic system is designed for, right? It's like it's how do we distribute resources because we live in a world with scarcity. It's what capitalism is. It's what socialism is, etc.
Right. So let's talk about like the Rob and Caruso part. You'll have to jive my memory with the analogy, but suppose, for instance, Rob, Caruso, they're on the island and they go and they see the stick. Okay, they both reach for the stick at the exact same time. They pick up the stick at the exact same time, and then they walk back to, I don't know, their hut, and they lay the stick down in the hut that they both go to sleep in every single night. Okay, and then they drop the stick and they both walk away. Would you say that they don't have collective ownership of that stick? They both used it first. They both picked it up at the exact same time. They both walked away with it at the exact same time, and they both placed it in a tent. Even if you don't think even if you only think one of them, only Rob can own this tent, right? The fact that they both
Right.
placed
Only
it
one of them. Right. Only one of them can own the stick. That's a fact. Because if there is a disagreement on how to use the stick, well, only one of them can be right. Because if the stick needs to be used for two opposing things and it's one stick, it can't, like the laws of reality, as we stated in the very beginning, like the law of identity, right? Like that stick can only be in one place in the material in the universe at a time. Now, granted, let's say they're identical twins, right? And like, so they both have the exact same idea, pops in the exact same time. They both pick it up, right? And throughout the entire process, they never have a disagreement on how to use the stick. It is true that in the kind of objective world, one of them is the owner of the stick, but no conflict occurred because they never attempted to use the stick towards opposing means. That wouldn't be collective ownership. It would mean that one person owns the stick, the other person is utilizing the stick with them to the exact same ways that the owner wants to use the stick, because the owner wants the stick to do A, and then B comes along and wants the stick to be used for A. So they agree. So it's not that there's collective ownership. It just means that there's no conflict has occurred because both people, this happens all the time with a husband and a wife, right? Like a husband and a wife own a house together. That is collective ownership as far as the state is concerned. And the state will even allow them to both own the house. Now, what we know in reality is that neither of them own the house. Usually the bank owns the house, and then over top of that, the government owns the house. Because if you don't pay your property taxes, eventually the government will take it, right? And if you guys have a divorce, the government will decide who gets to keep the house and who has to pay the other person a bunch of fucking money or whatever, right? Like all of these other, it's actually the government that owns it. But we kind of agree to the concept of us owning it. But we can also agree that plenty of people can live peaceably because there's a marriage contract and know that, like, oh, we have an extra $20,000 in the bank. I want to redo the kitchen. My wife wants to redo the kitchen. I want to redo the kitchen in camouflage with deer antlers on all the handles. And my wife says, that's fucking retarded. And anytime somebody comes over, it's going to look like a hunter's cabin in our kitchen. It's gross. That's not happening. Well, guess what? Now we have conflict. But we agree to resolve conflict, which is that one of us usually gives up. And 9 times out of 10, happy wife makes a happy life. They eventually realize that the wife knows what she's talking about and it's stupid, and they give up on it. Because if not, they'll get divorced. And if they get divorced, they'll end up having to leave the house anyways and pay her alimony, right? Because he's the provider and it's just going to be a shitty day for him. So he agrees to give up. Is there coercion in that? Is there a state ownership? There's all kinds of problems in that. But that doesn't mean that people can't agree on things. That doesn't mean that the property is collectively owned, though.
So basically what you're saying to me is, I understand it. The reason like why there can't be a collective ownership of the stick, okay? It's because they come into conflict and one of them has to make the decision. Only one of them can decide, if you want to use it as a fishing pole and the other person wants to use it as a javelin to go and hunt wild hogs on the island.
Right.
Only one of there can only be one use. So let me ask you then, okay? Suppose instead of 2 people, okay? We now make the stick enormously stupidly long, okay? And instead, let's say it's 10 people, okay? And these 10 people, instead of this 2 people, they all go to the log and they all lift the log at the same time. They all take the log back to the encampment where they are all sleeping and they put it down. And 9 of the people that all found the log and picked it up at the same time, they all want to chop the wood up for firewood, but one person wants to turn it into a boat. This is so
It's
in this
conflict.
case, well, I understand it's conflict, but in this case, the reason, this goes back into what you were saying earlier. Only one side may decide what to do with the log, right?
Right.
There's only one side, but in this case, it's not just 2 different people.
Well, it's
that are
not one
arguing.
side.
Like
There's one person. One person owns that log and 9 people help them.
Well, but isn't it 9 people that own it? If there can only be 2 options, okay? It can be the 9's decision about what we chop this up into firewood and burn it, or it can be the 1's decision of we turn
Right.
this into a canoe and we
But
go sailing.
the right to the decision that is not conflict inducing is the first user principle. Now you're saying there was 10 simultaneous users,
Yes, that's the point. Like, they all pick up at
right?
the same time.
The you can have, I mean, it's extremely unlikely from like a probability perspective. I don't know that it's even probabilistically likely enough for it ever to have occurred in all of human history. But if we assume that it is possible that no communication, no embordering, no one says, hey, that stick, I want to grab that. No one makes it. They all kind of collectively hive mind like Killiks, right? This species now all think the same, right? You know, like whatever, like they all collectively hive mind do it, right? Then what we get there would be you might be able to consider that common property. And under common property, which is not the same thing as public property, common property would be usually you wouldn't use it for like a stick that you just got because, like I said, that's astronomically unlikely to occur. What you would use common property for is, let's say people have been in a village for 3 generations and all the original people that built the village are all dead. And there's a well in the middle of the village and everybody uses this well for well water, right? Well, who owns the well? Well, nobody owns the well because it's actually unhomesteaded property because whoever built the well originally abandoned the property. Now, anybody can go up to the well at any moment and say, actually, this is my well. Fuck all of you. None of you get water. And then you would say, well, that's kind of an absurd conflict inducing system, isn't it? Like, that's not ethical. That's actually conflict inducing because everybody was happy utilizing the common property of the well water. And so what we recognize is that there are multiple users, but there's no established homestead person. There's no established first user. Instead, what you have is multiple collective users of a property, but they don't collectively own the property because they don't own the well itself because they didn't build the well and it's not exclusively theirs. They don't have a right to exclude other people, right? It's not like the stick where I can say, fuck you, this is my stick, because now there's like this collective kind of thing. And so the way that this is resolved is that it is true that anybody can come and grab that well and they can build a better well if they so choose, but they have to maintain what access was given by other people that were already utilizing it as common property. But as new people come in, they have no right to use the well. And if I build a well, let's say that gives triple the water that the old well used to give, like a fancy new well that digs deeper into the ground, right? I can sell all the excess water because I said this was mine. I built a better well, and now I can sell excess water. But I do have to maintain the usage that was being used by other people that had a collective use. But again, this is fairly rare, and this is also controversial. Common property is very controversial. Hoppe makes an argument for it in public, common, private property and the rationalization for the total privatization of property. I believe it's the title. You can look it up. And this is where we start getting into the open borders versus closed borders versus how do we utilize schools and roads that are public. Like we're starting to get into the things that I don't want to say are at the limit of my ability, but where I'm not necessarily speaking for all libertarians here, and that I have disagreements with my libertarians on the philosophy here because we're at the end of the philosophy in terms of the complicated stuff. So I do agree with you that it is a difficult question, and I do affirm common property as such, but that private property is superior, and that yes, common property rights ought be maintained and that they do exist, but they're not collective ownership. They're individual ownership of a usage that was maintained before in such a way. So with the log, if you cut it up and turn it into firewood, then you're destroying the log. And so the other 9 people need to buy out the 10th member, and he has to agree to their terms. Otherwise, they cannot destroy the log. That's the difference between private property and common property, because they have to maintain the right that he had because they all had similar rights to the thing. But if they destroy the thing, then they need to buy him out in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, so as it applies to roads, as it applies, I know that you're against public schools. I don't know if you're against. I think you're against taxation completely, correct? Is that fair
I'm
to
not,
say?
I'm not against voluntary taxation, but then that's not taxation really. Like I'm not against 100 people getting together and voluntarily buying a plot of land and then saying we're going to take 10% of everything that everybody makes so that we can build this thing. And if everybody
Right.
agrees to it, it's fine. But if one person disagrees, they don't get to then go. Because I mean, like we can use the log, we can use taxation the same way, right? Like there's the reason it's the log, right? And taxation, the reason these things are different is because let's change the log into a person, right? And this is what makes property and bodily autonomy different, right? Because you said there's 10 people and they all agree that they want to use the log. Well, what if 10 people all agree they want to use the person's body, right? If 10 people all say we want to rape this person, right? It's not an ethical system. Even if 10 people say, well, we have the will of the people, right? There's 11 people present, 10 out of the 11, or let's say there's 10 people present, 9, 11, 90%, right? 12% of people in America are young earth creationists. So if you believe in democracy, you absolutely believe that these 9 people have the right to rape this woman brutally to death and never give her a proper burial and then rape her corpse because they want to. And it's 90% say it's okay. Well, no, there's a conflict there, right? And that ethical system is invalid because it's conflict inducing, because it violates that person's bodily autonomy. That makes it invalid. It's not, you can't claim that that's morally good to gang rape a woman to death because 90% said it was okay. And yet that's a much higher percentage than almost any democratic system we have in the world today.
Mm-hmm. So let's go into the question of corpses, right? So when we're discussing bodily autonomy, again, I'm assuming that you, I don't want to misquote you, like I'm assuming that means unique, distinct moral agents that belong to a species of moral agents based on a potentiality of consciousness. So a dead person, for instance, right? So
Yeah.
suppose the 9 people, they all find a dead person in the woods and they need blood donations, they need kidney donations, they want to basically harvest the body for organs
Yeah.
to then distribute. Do you think there's
Yeah, you're
anything
good.
ethically wrong with that? You think that's fine?
Yeah, you can. I mean, I would have moral qualms with it,
Mhm.
right? Like I would have a moral issue with people disgracing bodies. I think most people agree that it is their
Right.
moral preference that bodies not be distributed. But in terms of ethics, in terms of conflict inducing, right? This
Mhm.
is who owns the body would be the family member.
Right.
Just like you own the
Well,
will. It reverts to property the moment that it's no longer a conscious being and it's incapable of consciousness. It's dead. When you're dead, you're dead.
so we can go back to that, but that's a point that I'm going to write down. Okay. So the
That's fine.
moment, yeah, the moment consciousness, and this is going really long. I apologize. I know we've been here for a while. I
It's
enjoy
fine.
it. Just,
I don't have anything
yeah.
else going on today
Okay.
other than
So,
some editing work.
so let's see. So, okay. So fair enough. So, we're the reason why we went down this rabbit hole was to discuss like an ethical system and an ethical system that reduces conflict. And I wanted to really define what we meant by conflict, define what we meant by resource, and define like why you think the collective ownership can't exist. It's because you think that only one person can make the decision over the use of this one thing, but there can in fact be such a thing as common property if the majority of people in the society come together and vote and they
Right.
want to do this particular
But
thing,
they
but they
still
have to
can't
buy out.
use
But they
they
can't
still
violate the
can't
other person.
use right. No, they can't use scarce resources towards opposing means. They still can't do
Yes.
that. Right. So even though you can have common property, such as a well,
Mhm.
right? They can't destroy the well when other people
Right.
want the well maintained.
Right.
Right.
So so this is the question here, like the ethical system that reduces conflict, right? So sure.
Pardon me.
And when we're thinking of an ethical system that requires coercion, and we're against the idea of coercion, I'm against the idea of coercion, right? But again, when we're thinking about ethical systems, I can think of a lot of ethical systems that reduce conflict by quite literally like fascism, right? Like unironically, right? Like you could reduce conflict simply by why like I
It's
understand
conflict
like
inducing.
why
Yeah.
not
Fascism is
necessarily.
conflict inducing. By
Well,
definition, it has to be because it doesn't recognize the non-aggression principle or private property rights.
right, but if we're talking about simply reducing conflict, reducing how to utilize reducing like disagreements over how to utilize finite resources. Like a very simple way to do that is to go and to blow someone's brains out. It's to kill them and then to take their property. That's
Well,
wrong. I think it's immoral, but that is a way to reduce conflict. It's to get rid of the people that disagree with you, right?
right.
That's
And that doesn't work in ethical framework, because in an ethical framework, it requires an observer, right? So once you have a society of people and your rules are, if you disagree, you can blow people's brains out, and that's okay, right? Now you've instantiated a conflict inducing system. You've instantiated something that says that once there's a disagreement, don't argue, don't respect their bodily autonomy. We won't have a vote on it. We won't do any of that. What we'll do is we'll blow your brains out for the crime of disagreeing. And so, yeah,
it
like,
might.
I mean,
Well,
you can say
it might.
it's conflict reducing by getting rid of the people. Isn't really conflict reducing, right? You just got rid of the people. The conflict was there. The conflict was initiated. The conflict wasn't reduced. The conflict was simply resolved. And the way it was resolved was through murder.
Right.
It's
And I
unethical.
don't.
It's illogical.
I understand. Well, I think that it's immoral. I think that it's wrong. As far as whether or not it's unethical, it would depend on the ethical system, right? Like, I think that, like, this is something that I think that they're I don't know. I think that there can be. This is a problem that I have. The issue that I have is that I am an atheist and I do treat like many of the things that I believe to be immoral as objective, even though I don't think there can be an objective basis behind it. So I recognize it's a flaw that I've had before and having religious conversations prior. So, but all is to say, right?
Right.
I
Your axiom is the circular axiom of empiricism. You kind of just flow, not knowing what to believe and going off of your moral preferences. Whereas the Christian's axiom is a faith-based one, right? Which is, God's real. God gives us logic. God gives us these laws. Follow these laws.
Right. And that doesn't work for me. But and you can feel free to critique me on the fact that like I base it off of like what I can empirically observe and what I can empirically verify, and that there isn't actually an underlying axiom behind it. But I'm
Mhm.
telling you why I don't think I have an underlying axiom, and that's because I don't know that I believe that there is a natural law axiom that I could use. And I know like that's part of like why we're having this conversation, why we have this disagreement. I think it's because you think that you can stem rights, you can stem like an ought from, again, the ought from the is, right? The fact that I am
No.
autonomous. No, okay, okay, just to be very clear, okay? So it stems from the idea that if you have bodily autonomy, then you have the ability to argue with other people. And if you have the capacity to argue with other people, you and you alone, you're establishing norms of conflict avoidance, okay? And you can't violate the non-aggression principle. And therefore, that is why you have the right to bodily autonomy. Is that
It's fairly close, right? The main thing here is the is ought gap, right? And so this is why I said before, I don't bridge the is ought gap. I don't say one ought not violate bodily autonomy. One ought follow the non-aggression principle. I do say that in common conversation. And I mean, I guess you could call it a lie, if you will. It's not really a lie. It's mostly like I don't say super complicated things in common talks, because like it would be annoying as like it would be so pretentious of me to constantly say one ought follow the non-aggression principle if they so choose, that their ethical framework that they design be logical, and ethical frameworks must be logically consistent in order to be true, because moral propositional claims that are the foundation of ethical systems must be universalizable and must be logically valid. If I said that every fucking time that someone said our tax is cool, like I would be a crazy person, right? But like that's technically what I mean, is that like you don't get to justify violence. You don't get to justify taxes. You don't get to justify violations of the non-aggression principle as a logical ethical framework, because it's fucking not. That's what I mean. It's not logical.
okay? So I'm sorry, we kind of went on a tangent, but I want to go back to
That's
the
fine.
ethical system reduction of conflicts, right? When you say reduction of conflict, do you just mean the total amount of conflict within the society at large, or do you mean just the individual disagreements of conflict? So,
What I mean to say is that I don't care about the numbers of conflicts. I don't care about going from one system to another where one is a 15% reduction and the other is a 30% reduction. What I'm saying is that the purpose of ethics is to resolve conflicts. That is the entire purpose, is to resolve what is right and wrong in a collective and determine rules based off of what is right and wrong. And that if your system is by definition conflict inducing because it attempts to make things right, it attempts to say that it is right to do something that is logically unjustifiable and conflict inducing, then it is not a valid ethical framework. It doesn't matter if it's 10% better as far as the consequentialists are concerned, or let's say it's like lactoid, right? Where it doesn't matter that it is better at reducing property issues or things that I value. It's still an illogical and thus unethical framework if it intentionally induces property rights violations or violations of bodily autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the reason why I asked was because if the point of an ethical system is to reduce conflict, because, and this again goes back to the fascism example, right? And this is actually this is just a point that I've had this disagreement with somebody who was deeply Islamic before, which is that when you look at some countries like Saudi Arabia, they have very low crime rates. They have very, at least reportedly anyway, who knows if it's actually true or not. Right. But assuming, let's just pretend for a minute that it is true, right? They have low rates of crime. They have low rates of violent crime. They have low rates of theft. But it's also an ethical system where it wasn't too long ago where you could have your hands chopped off. You could be beheaded, in Riyadh, in the capital, for violating the system, right? So
yeah, I mean, certain punishments might seem barbaric, and they might actually be fine, right? But the thing here is that we define crime, as you kind of already pointed out, the one problem, which is that they're reporting it and they're lying. We all know they are. And the other problem is that they're not reporting crimes that are crimes, which is their very ethical system. Stoning a woman for wanting an education, or beating a woman for going outside of her house without her man present, or beating a woman for having her hymen busted as a child, being a tomboy, and her husband not having a hymen on their wedding night. All these things are crimes, but they're not reported crimes because their ethical framework is not. Right. So they're conflict-inducing crimes against people's bodily autonomy, which make them invalid. We can say that they have low rates of crime, but there are crimes there that are created by the very presumed ethical system that they attempt to justify, which are not justifiable.
So then can I ask you something? Do you think that the state has the right to arrest people, or do you believe in the right of capital? Do you think that the state has the right to execute people for crimes?
No, I don't think the state has a right to exist, much less arrest people. I will say this, which is, if I'm a strategist, right, and I am given the option tomorrow to push a button, and the button says everything else will be exactly the same, and that there will be magically no changes, which of course this is predicting the future, right? So obviously this can't exist, but I'm working with it. But the United States is going to let all prisoners out of prison and never house prisoners again. I wouldn't do that because it's illegal for me to capture prisoners, right? And so because it's illegal for me to capture prisoners, I'm actually increasing the abuses, right? And so, but both systems would be unjustifiable. I might push the button, right? I don't know. I might, if it starts a war or whatever, I don't know. But at the end of the day, no, they don't have a right to do that. They've simply stolen that right from the people.
I bring up the fascism, this kingdom of Saud. I bring up those examples simply to point out that you could have a totalitarian, authoritarian, evil society that absolutely violates the rights of the people, that abuses, that stones them, that kills them, that abuses them, but nonetheless, as a consequence, lowers the overall rate of ethical conflicts that people come into. That lowers
we can say it's possible.
Rate of rights violations.
I don't know that it's possible, but I'll bite the bullet that it might be possible that there's a percentile reduction in the efficacy of one unethical system versus another unethical system, right? Which is to say the United States has an unethical system of crime and punishment and law, and so does Saudi Arabia. And it's would not shock or surprise me that Saudi Arabia has things I don't like
Mhm.
that are worse than they are in the United States.
Mhm.
And also that Saudi Arabia might be able to reduce overall crime, right? Like if Hitler ran America and he saw how many black people committed violent crimes disproportionate to white people, right? He would probably just get rid of all the black people. And you would say, well, look at how much violent crime went down. It's like, well, yeah, but also he genocided all the black people.
Right.
Right?
And
Like,
that's obviously, it's
it's not
obviously,
really a
I'm not,
reduction, right?
well, what I'm saying is it's obviously it's immoral and it's immoral. But what I'm saying is that doesn't mean the fact that an unethical system is evil and that it enacts genocide or that it abuses its people does not necessarily mean that it's not an ethical system. It just means that it's
I
immoral to
disagree.
enact.
I think it's illogical. And if it's illogical and conflict inducing, then it's not actually a system that you could call ethical. It's just an imposed set of rules that violate logic. And it is, without a doubt, it is the system always is the law of the jungle. Anytime a system violates bodily autonomy and attempts to justify aggression, it is synonymous with might makes right. So long as enough people have enough power and say that it's okay, then it's okay. There is no difference between
Mhm.
the ethics of the United States legal system and the ethics of 9 gang rapists raping one girl because they decided that they wanted to. There's no difference between the United States criminal justice system and that in terms of its logical consistency. Right. You can say there are less overall abuses than in terms of people's property. That there are that other systems like Russia, for example, are far worse. Where, you know, if you attempt to protest, they'll put a fake police officer next to you just so they can beat the shit out of you and throw you in the gulag for the crime of having an organized protest, even though you didn't even break the fucking law, right? Like there's no doubt that there will be worse systems in terms of overall abuses from a consequentialist framework, but they're both equally invalid and by the very logic that they are conflict inducing and violating against those things, and that they can't be justified logically because attempting to justify them can't be done.
So let
Because
me ask you another.
it creates a performative contradiction.
So let me ask you another question. So again, we're talking about the right to bodily autonomy. And the reason why you think we have a right to bodily autonomy is if you want to be logically consistent and if you want to have an ethical system that is logically consistent, then you concede to the fact that you have the right to bodily autonomy. So it's an if-then
Right.
statement. Okay.
It's an if
So
then, yeah. It's a modus tollens, right? Like if one wishes to be logical, you know, I have it written out earlier, but actually I'll find it for you. But you can continue, but I'll find it.
yeah. Well, so here's my question then. Do you think that serial killers that so let's suppose like we have somebody who is truly like an amoral actor, okay? They're a complete psychopath. They don't have an ethical system. They don't want to have an ethical system. And they do not care about being logically consistent. Does that person still have bodily autonomy?
Yeah, so no. Yes and no. It's kind of weird. So this is where you get into
Or do they have the
estoppel.
right to bodily autonomy? That's what I'm really asking.
Right. So they've lost the right to bodily autonomy. And the reason they've lost the right to bodily autonomy is that they owe restitution to the victims of their crimes. Until such a time that they do that, they have already argued against bodily autonomy. And they did so via the knife, right? They didn't do so via their words. So, you know, there's estoppel principle. It's like a dialogical estoppel from Stephen Kinsella. So it's 1994. Regardless, basically the argument is this: when in our current legal system, there's a estoppel principle where, let's say you're charged with a DUI, right? Then you get a second DUI charge. You're not legally allowed to make the argument, I've never drunk and drive in my entire life, because there's a court record that says you've been convicted guilty of the crime of driving under the influence of alcohol. So you're stopped from making that argument, right? It's a similar thing with the serial killer. He kills a woman, 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 right? He's just going on a rampage, right? Then we go to kidnap him to stop him from killing people. And he goes, stop, don't violate my rights to bodily autonomy. How dare you? It's like, you already made the argument that you're one of those people that does not care about your ethical framework being logically consistent by virtue of you stabbing these women. Now, the same is true. We can do it of a lesser degree of, let's say, a carjacker. They've done the same thing. I get to arrest them and whatever. I don't get to kill them because that punishment exceeds their capacity of restitution. I mean, like, I can kill them if, like, they're in the act and, like, I'm defending my property, you know, that's a separate thing. But, like, let's say I find them asleep on the couch and the cops get them and we put them in the paddy wagon, we put them in jail, and then we go to, like, do a court case. I don't get to kill them then because my car is only, I have a shitty car, right? Like, I have a fucking 90s fucking Toyota Corolla, right? I don't drive anything fancy. It works. So, like, yeah, he owes me a Toyota Corolla and he owes me my time and money and the insurance company that I use and the cops or whatever to go capture him. He owes me all that. But once he pays all that back, he can now logically argue that he has a right. He can, like, look, I paid for what I did. I'm sorry. At the time, I didn't believe that. I believe that now. But if he hasn't paid for any of that, I can go, I don't care what you say. Your actions have proven that you disbelieve this thing. So that would be the logic there of, like, crime, etc.
So here's this goes back into the embryo and the fetus, right? So if the reason why you have the right to bodily autonomy is because if you wish to be logically consistent and if you wish to live in a society that has an ethical system which has to be logically consistent, that does not
Yeah,
require
they're one and the
coercion.
same. Yeah.
Yeah. But my question to you is, when we're thinking about a fetus, when we're thinking about even, I could even make the argument, like, regarding, like, a very small child. I don't know if I mean, just being on, like, I don't know if the fetus has the capacity to wish to be I mean, I know that they don't have the capacity to wish to be logically consistent. They don't have the capacity to even to understand what an ethical system is. They don't have the
Yes, I
capacity to
agree.
understand what
Yeah.
coercion is. Well, but if that's the case, then you could say then that these children do not have the right to bodily autonomy, right? Because they don't
It's
have the
very
capacity.
interesting. It's very interesting how many bullets you're willing to bite and how you're willing to walk through the philosophy with me. But you seem very, very married to this idea of like getting me on the abortion thing. I
I'm
don't
not.
I don't know why. It's funny, but yeah, no, we already talked about this, right? Which is that it's their species. You don't by a speciation and potentiality, we recognize that
Mhm.
they don't have the capacity to consent. They don't have the capacity to act in many, many ways. They need a guardian to protect them so that they can grow and develop, right? And I said the same thing. I said, if you make the argument that, like, it must start at 8 weeks, why not the argument of a 1-year-old, right? Because a 1-year-old's less conscious, less a moral actor in capacity than, you know, a dog, right? And so if I can eat dogs and, you know, and that's fine, why can't I fucking eat babies? And the thing there is the potentiality. It is the fact that they, by virtue of a speciation, they're given these rights, and that they haven't argued against them. They haven't acted. They're not stopped from arguing for them. Their parents aren't, because they're not, for the same reason that a mentally challenged person's not criminally liable for a crime. The child isn't. Now, the guardian may be criminally liable for the damages that the child does, in some regards, but they're not liable for the crime of in the same way that, like I said, like a mentally challenged person is, because just like they can't consent, they don't get the understandings of their actions, etc.
So again, so just to be very clear, I do not think that child enslavement or that, like, kids do not. I don't think, at least not from from a natural rights perspective. I don't know if that's true, because I don't know that if I believe in natural rights. But just for the audience, so that everyone is aware, I'm not
But you're
advocating for the
proving that you do.
actual. Well, but the reason, like, why I don't believe in enslavement and why I don't believe that is because I think that, like, the only way that you can justify it is through subscribing to the social contract. So you subscribe to the social contract of the society in which you live in, where we collectively have decided and agreed that no, you can't own people as property. But that's the reason why you can't
How
own
is
a
that
person.
not
It's not.
slavery?
How is that not slavery?
How is that a non-slavery position?
How is it a non-slavery position that you subscribe to the social contract theory, and therefore that is what gives you rights?
Well, your position, correct me if I'm wrong, is that might makes right. That so long as enough people with enough power agree to it, then we consider that an ethical framework. And you may personally find it morally wrong against your own moral preferences, but that how society determines what is right and wrong is determined by those that have power in society, and that you don't actually get to call something wrong if you're outvoted.
Well, I think that like you can either choose that pathway or you could choose the pathway which is the spiritual or the religious argument, which is that you say that like it's separate from what the social contract that you have an ethical or moral system that is separate from the social contract that you subscribe to. To answer
Yeah,
your question on how
I have a moral
like
system that's separate from my libertarianism. Like I tend to be
yeah.
objectivist in most things, which is a consequentialist kind of.
Right. Well, the reason why I don't think why is it not a pro-slavery position? Because if we're subscribing to the social contract theory of what is property and what is slavery, you're therefore subscribing to the idea of what makes something slavery or what doesn't make it slavery. You're not I'm rejecting the existentialist aspect of like this you are enslaved or you are slavery. The point is like you are not a slave because we as a society agree that this is not what slavery means. Which again goes back into
Okay,
our
so
conversation about
right, but
language.
then
Like
like what is genocide? If genocide's never been committed, so long as whomever was in power defined it as not genocide, right? Like
this
that
is
doesn't make
that
sense.
well, that's a fair critique, actually. Well, somebody wrote about this. They critique the concept of human rights. I think it was Adorno, but I'm not sure. And specifically, what they were critiquing is the idea that you have rights, that you have any rights, comes as a citizen, comes from on the basis of you being a citizen. So you, like, I'm assuming you're American. I don't know. Like, we have the right to freedom of speech. We have certain rights granted to us by the Constitution. But if you're somebody, if you're an immigrant who hops the border and walks into the United States, you don't have those rights because you are not a citizen, which leaves us in a bungle, right? How do we deal with this person who exists within our society that is not subscribed to the social contract? Um, without how do we
Right.
morally or
So
ethically
you
treat them,
believe
which is a
right.
flaw in it,
So you
but
believe rights don't exist other than given by the state. Only the state can grant rights. Rights don't exist.
I don't see how you can justify how a right can exist without making and not a I don't see how you can justify how a natural right exists without making. And I know that like we've been discussing like the facts of the world, why your rights stem
I
from
was
those
like, I
facts.
feel like I made a pretty long argument for it.
Yes, yes, I understand, but that's why I'm giving you this answer. It's because I'm not sure
Mhm.
that you can. It's the ought versus is problem.
Yeah,
Now I
well, the
grant
his
you that
problem
this
again, I said is solved by the
is solved.
concept of logic. Yeah,
Maybe, but
you.
I would say
It's like it's not about an ought is. You don't need to worry about the ought is gap. It's are you logically consistent? If you're logically inconsistent, then it doesn't matter what you're saying. You're saying gobbledygook. And if you're logically consistent, then you're affirming bodily autonomy and the non-aggression principle. One cannot be logically inconsistent and also not affirm non-aggression principle and bodily autonomy. It's not possible. It's a performative contradiction. To engage in argumentation that's true and fair and say, I think rights ought to be violated and that you don't have a right to your body and that I can tax you and I can take from you. Also, whilst performing that you agree that I am my own person, that I have exclusive control over my body, that you don't have control over it, and that the way that we ought resolve this conflict is through argumentation and conversation and not through violence.
Mm-hmm. But again, like this, I mean, so I like explained to you, or like I bit the bullet earlier, like you do have control over your own body, but just again, for the sake of
Right.
and I understand like existentially, like, yes, I am in control. Like when I go and I pick up this like thing of lotion, right? Like in that sense, that might be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, right, you would agree, however, that like, do you think people are malleable? Like, and forget about the fraud example. Like, that's not what I mean. Like, what I mean is you can be unduly influenced by, let's say, let's not even say fraud. Let's say extortion. You can be like you
Well,
mentioned coercion
extortion would be
earlier.
violence. Extortion would be violence. Let's clean it up. Let's steel man your argument, right? And let's assume there's no extortion, there's no fraud. To give you the strongest example I can give you, let's go with you are a single mother. You have a job that finally pays the bills for the first time, and you are a secretary to a wealthy, powerful businessman, and he makes passive, non-demanding sexual advances towards you. Is there an element of coercion completely separate despite the fact that he never threatened your job. He never said he would get rid of you. He never said he wouldn't give you a raise. He never did anything wrong. He just simply said some comment about how sexy you looked in clothing. And there was no, for whatever reason, you didn't notice that there was no like violation, that wasn't in like an HR clause in the contract, right? Now, obviously, we live in a world where there are laws on the books, so like you would expect that not to exist. But let's say it was in a libertarian world, right? And the money was just too good. You had to take it because you had to pay for your kids. Yeah, I don't disagree that people sometimes make decisions that they wouldn't want to make because the outcomes are preferable. But the problem is that goes all the way back to the first axiom, the axiom of human action. Tragedy is the default state of man. Poverty is the default state of man. You can say, I don't want to do a thing because it seems distasteful, but you prove via your actions that you actually do want to do a thing. So when she accepts the sexual advances of her boss and gets a raise and maybe does some things, right, whatever, and is taken care of, and it's never explicitly stated, but it's kind of there. She proved via her actions, not her words, not her arguments, that she indeed was willing to give up her sense of shame or whatever it might be to gain those beneficial things that she wanted. And that's not really coercive. If there is genuine coercion there, then it's a form of violence. And that's the best example I can give. You can come up with a better example because I'm genuinely trying to steel man your position.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. So there are maybe some. Okay, so what you're saying is like, yes, there might be some situations where there appears to be coercion, but if you choose to give into it, then you are agreeing to the terms. So it's not really coercion, and it's not coercion unless it's directly stated that this will happen to you.
Well, I mean, like you can hint at coercion. It doesn't need to necessarily be directly stated. Just like there's an implicit contract, there can be an implicit coercion, right? Like let's change the scenario ever so slightly. Instead of him being like, oh, Margie, oh, your butt looks good in that skirt, and then kind of waiting to see what happens and see if you go back and forth and he can be playful. If he comes up to you and then just goes like, next time, I think that shirt ought to be a little bit. That skirt ought to be a little bit shorter because daddy likes it, and then gives you a fucked up look. Like he's not explicitly saying he's going to fire you, but there's clearly like the way he spoke it, the way he put it forward, maybe his body actions, maybe he's tall and he like made a few stepping advances and towered over you in it. It doesn't need to necessarily be explicit to be coercive. Like if there's an implied kind of like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'll fuck you up if you don't do what I tell you, it's still coercive. It might be hard to define legally, right? It might be difficult to prove in court, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there.
If you're an uninformed actor and suppose we get rid of like the wink, wink, you better do it or else I'll fire you. Like suppose for instance, like the boss has HIV, okay? And he doesn't really like actually say you have to come and sleep with me or gives the wink wink nudge nudge, hey Marja, your skirt had better be shorter next time, but he does heavily like flirt, he does heavily imply that it would be in her best interest to choose to dress more sexually in the office, and so she chooses to, right, and so she chooses to sleep with him because of this, right? And then afterwards she finds out, now I have HIV as a consequence. Do you think, does that change it for you or does it not change it for you? Because she was uninformed before she made
I'm
the
iffy.
decision.
I'm iffy on STDs and that. And here's why. Like this is where my ethics and my morals split, right? Morally, I'm with you, right? Like I think that's a sleazeball. That's a piece of shit. If I found out about it, I'm not doing business with that guy. I want everyone to know what he did and what kind of a piece of shit. Like I want his name to be synonymous with Harvey Weinstein everywhere he goes. Ethically, to be logically consistent, if you're having sex with your boss and and your boss never coerces you and doesn't even imply coercion, he just flirts with you, and you're doing so and you're not asking questions, you're not making sure this person is drug and disease free, etc. It's unfortunate, it's horrible, and I think it is immoral anti-life behavior that he's engaging in that I would consider to be wrong. but I can't prove that to be unethical. I can't prove that I have a right to use violence to stop him. I think he's a piece of shit and we should exclude him from society. But yeah, no, I don't think you could argue that it would be ethical to lock him in jail. You might be able to. It's a weird one because of disclosure. Like that's a gray area, but I think you would be unethical to claim that it is okay to arrest that person.
Okay. Here's another question that I know I'm asking you thousands of questions, but like on the question of
I'll do
right to
the
bodily
libertarian Q&A. It's chill.
Okay. So when we're thinking of the right to bodily autonomy, I know that like I began this with a very literal, like this is your body, this is my hands, this is my leg, this is my head, right? Do you extend that to the rights of the mind at all? So for instance, like if one wishes to be logically consistent and one wishes to recognize an ethical system, and that ethical system has to be logically consistent, it can't imply coercion or violence of any kind. Do you consider information or forcing someone to say something that they don't want to say, or to attend a class that they don't want to attend, or to do everything? I don't think that I actually don't know if brainwashing
Wouldn't that require
actually
your
is
body?
true.
Well,
Well,
would that force you to go to a class? Wouldn't that force your body?
well, it does, but that's what I'm asking you is like, are we just talking about you forcing to do the action, or could it also? I'm using these examples because they're the closest
No,
thing
no,
we have.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to understand.
yeah, to somebody trying to control your thoughts. I mean, these and like most of the time, like when we're thinking about like legislation or when we're thinking about arguments against thought control, usually it comes out of just freedom
Okay,
of
okay, I
speech
see what you're saying.
arguments.
I
Yeah,
see what you're saying.
but
Like, is
yeah,
there a line, let's say, where like,
mhm,
let's say I develop a technology based off of some science of like light and
yeah,
the way that different colors and shades and rhythms of light, and I can like
mhm,
put a machine that like when you're not paying attention, hits
yeah,
light in the corner of your eyes and does no damage to you. It just makes you
mhm,
want to buy a Coca-Cola,
yeah,
right? Like no
exactly.
matter what, if I hit this button, you will want to buy a Coca-Cola.
Yes, yes, yes. That's what I
Yeah,
meant.
yeah. I mean, this is a cool conversation. This is a cool futuristic kind of conversation, right? Like, I would say yes, but also it depends. And the reason I would say it depends is that like trying to convince somebody is different than something that eliminates self-control, right? So like advertising is trying to convince you of something, right?
Mhm,
Um, you know, is it unethical to advertise? It's
mhm,
unethical to advertise if it's fraud because then it gets rid of your ability to control your choice, right? Is that
mhm,
like if it meets all 9 principal elements of fraud, then you've been lied to. I can't find the truth or I can't test the veracity of your claims elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so what I would say is mind control. I know this is kind of silly way to put it, but mind control really is just an extension of fraud, which is another form of aggression.
okay. I'll just tell you why I'm asking you this. This has nothing to do with like the original like reason why I wanted to talk to you. But I ask you this because I have an anti-rehabilitation take that I believe in. That's based on the idea that people have the right to believe and to think whatever it is they want to think, and that rehabilitation like violates that. So that's sort of like the reason like why I asked. That's
What
a
do you mean?
separate. I gave this take a few years ago. And essentially like what I can actually find like the paper that I wrote a few years ago. Basically, like I argue that like the idea that you're going to force somebody to be rehabilitated for a crime that they don't believe is a crime, that they think is a morally just thing for them to do,
Oh, you
is
mean
an
you mean rehabilitation? Okay, okay, okay.
yeah. And
I thought you meant helping people to walk. I was like, what?
no, 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 prison
It's like physical
rehabilitation. So
therapy? Like what
no,
the
so,
fuck?
no,
Okay.
no, 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 no.
No,
So
no, I'm
so
with you now. I'm with you. I was like, what?
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
so for instance, like requiring somebody, so if you're in a state, for instance, where pot is illegal and you're arrested for pot, and then the judge tells you, I will lower your sentence and you don't have to go to jail for 6 months if you attend like 6 courses of Narcotics Anonymous. In exchange for that, like you don't have to go to jail. But you as an individual think that smoking pot is perfectly fine. And you don't think that it's wrong. You don't believe that it's wrong.
I don't know. I think it should be allowed so long as it's voluntary.
But
I
don't you
think
think
I
it's
thought
coercive?
I mean, yes. I mean, like I'm imagining it stepping it outside of the coercive element of the state, right? Which is let's say, so like Robert Murphy's Chaos Theory is a really good book about how to use legal systems without a state, like with rights enforcement agencies. And so like, let's say you commit some crime and then society says, wherever you live, they're like, you're fucking banished. You're not allowed to come in, right? Because you did this crime, whatever the crime is. And then society, your insurance company negotiates on your behalf and says they'll let you back in if you voluntarily check into this like prison for 3 months, and your insurance pay. This is part of your insurance payments, so it's already covered. So you go to this program, this rehabilitation program for 3 months, and then society will let you back in. If it's purely voluntary, where you can go, no, fuck that, I'm not going. I'm going to go live out in a cabin in the woods. Or yes, I would like to be re-enter into society. I violated a contract before, and they're giving me the ability to make up for that by checking myself into this place so that I can be deemed like chill to hang out with people again, whatever it might be. Assume it's a minor crime. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that that's like, is it really coercive if it is a choice, and that choice is done based off of the fact that you've already lost your right to bodily autonomy, which is to say you've lost some of your rights when you've committed those crimes. You lose your ability to argue that you ought not be put in a cage when you rob people at gunpoint, for example.
But this is entirely dependent on whether or not you accept whether or not what you did should be a crime, whether or not it is an ethical violation, which is the reason why I bring up.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter.
You don't
Because
think
somebody
it
could be
matters?
crazy.
Well,
right? Like if
that's
somebody's
true.
crazy, they're not gonna believe that they did anything wrong, right?
Right. No, I don't
Everybody in
disagree with
prison's
you.
innocent. You know what I mean? I don't know if you know that.
Well, I understand like what you're saying, but what I'm also saying is that if you genuinely believe, okay, even if you're a crazy person, right, and you think it's within your full purview to pick up your knife and to stab that guy in the eye because he was the devil, okay, and he was giving you a
Right.
weird look and you had to get rid of him, okay,
Son of
and that's
Sam. You're
insane.
right.
Yeah, even if like you have somebody who's a crazy person who believes that, right?
Mhm.
It's still actually, I have like in like the way that I've thought this through, like the only exception that I make to this is if and only if the person in question is a person without agency. They're not a moral agent. They're not somebody that was in possession of full agency. So somebody that's not an adult, or somebody that is actually crazy, or somebody that's a mentally
Right.
disabled person, right? So
But
people that aren't.
setting those aside. Yeah, setting those aside.
Yes. Yeah, but setting those
Someone
aside, if you
believes that
are.
they were right in, let's say, robbing a liquor store.
Yes,
Right?
they
Like, fuck you,
genuinely
it's my
believe that.
liquor.
Yes, that's what they believe, right?
But how would this argument not be exactly the same for putting them in jail?
Why would it not be exactly the same? Because, and this again goes to the social contract theory, which we can talk, because you've subscribed, because the social contract, at least in the United States, says that you can agree to be arrested, to be put in jail. But you also, I think you have an
I never
implied
signed any
right.
contract.
Well, you agreed. I mean, we had this discussion like a few
Right,
weeks
right.
ago,
Okay,
right?
so so
Yeah.
you believe it's voluntary to go to jail, but it's
Mhm.
not voluntary to do the other things that the justice system puts forward? Like if
No,
you
no,
agree
no, no,
that
no.
the social contract theory stipulates that if you break crime, you do the time, right?
Mhm.
You also must agree that the social contract theory is that if you do the crime, you do the time or this other thing that the judge offered you to reduce your sentence. If you agree, you can't say the social
Unless
contract theory is agreeing
unless
to
the other
portions of the
but
fucking judicial system, but not other portions.
unless the thing that the judge offers you to do instead of going to jail violates some other aspect of the social contract, which is my contention. I'm arguing that it's a violation of the First Amendment. That's what I'm saying. It's an act of compelled speech to make somebody go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting that they don't want to have to attend, that they don't believe in, that they expressly don't believe in, and telling them they have to go. I argue that that's a violation of the First Amendment because it's compelled speech. You're compelling somebody to perform an
So
act of speech that is against their principles, which.
yeah, I mean, First Amendment is really just a protection from the government that is put in. It's baked in. It's a made up right that we make up because we attempted to justify the state. Right?
Mhm.
You don't have freedom of speech on other people's property, and you have all the freedom of speech on your own property. But the government treats all property as their property. There is no private property in America, right? There's a pretend private property where they grant you some privileges to use their property they stole from. And I don't agree with social contract theory, obviously, because I don't think you can be coerced into accepting a contract. I don't think you can be defrauded into accepting a contract too, because the amount of corruption that the state has constitutes fraud on a daily basis. Just like the existence of the FBI or the CIA. Like if we just go through a list of their fucking crimes that they've never been punished for, like we know it is an organization built upon fraud. So even if there was a social contract theory that was valid, it would have been invalidated by the fraud that the government commits on a daily basis anyways. Mm-hmm. So setting both of those things aside, I mean, I guess I kind of see what you're saying, the concept of compelled speech. I think if you wanted to better argue this or better understand this, I don't know if you ever took any, I don't know where your education is in, but if you read up on ethics in psychology, like APA established ethics, there is a ton of literature. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but there's a ton of literature on the ethics of court-ordered therapy. And there's a lot of arguments back and forth. And I think if you wanted to really like go into that, if I were you, I would start reading up on that. Because a lot of your arguments that you see are going to be there on both sides from doctors and psychologists. Back and forth. And I think you'll find a lot of valuable information there because it's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty fucking close to what you're talking about, which is like, you know, because when we were taught, you know, counseling, and it was like, you know, the patient or the client in counseling, it's not patient because you're not a fucking whatever, the client, right? Like if the client doesn't want to do anything, like you're basically fucked. Like your therapy is basically like your therapy drops off a cliff in efficacy the moment that the client has no desire to do anything. And so that's part of the ethics of like court-ordered stuff is that like it's really bad. Like it never fucking works. I don't want to say never works. It does work sometimes. And then there's a whole bunch of ethics of trying to force people into it. And then there's also a shackling too, where it's not just the prisoner that's shackled, right? But there are kind of like rules and shackles that are placed on the counselor or the psychologist that says that you need to meet certain goals or that you're supposed to do certain things with them. So it puts these constraints on like how you can practice. Obviously you voluntarily you volunteer to take them. So there's that, but like it becomes like it's very, very the efficacy rates are really bad because of those reasons. And there's like arguments on the ethics of like whether or not we should ever do it, et cetera. But I don't know. I would read up on that. I mean, like I said, it's, you know, it doesn't necessarily interest me because I don't believe in social contract theory, but it is an interesting thing maybe for you. And that's what I would look next.
Yeah, I would actually be very interested in looking that up because this is actually like one of my hottest takes. It's one of the things that I get into fights with the most over is whether or not you have the right to compel people to try to attend therapy or to attend some sort of re-education to try to resolve the crime that they committed, like within the society in which they lived. And it's my contention that
Yeah.
they should not be forced, and that they should not be forced because it's an act of compelled speech. That's
yeah. I mean, like
basically.
the more you go down these thoughts, it's like, you know, I make this argument often as a libertarian, which is whatever governmental power you give will be abused, obviously. And the question is it makes it easier for the next one to go. So while we might think it's fun and fluffy to make someone go to rehab, how far, like I'm not saying it's 1-to-1 step, but it is certainly a step closer to re-education camps, right? Like there is a point where we know governments send people to re-education camps. And now we are affirming at one point that some level of re-education camp is okay. Okay. And so it's like, you've given the government some power. How much closer does it get towards, you know, you were protesting something and you're a black bloc protester, commie, or a libertarian or whatever, right? And you're protesting something and you get found out for doing some low level of vandalism. And then you're forced to go into a, you know, war is peace kind of fucking Orwellian, you know, fucking mind control device to try and fix you. You know what I mean? Like obviously that's not what we're talking about, but also you're closer. The moment you affirm one.
Yeah, that's essentially like that is exactly like what my concern is. The responses that I've had are a couple of responses that I've received from people when I've brought this take to them is number one, the question of addiction. So people will bring up addicts, for instance. So people who are cocaine addicts, people who are heroin addicts, people who are alcoholics. And the argument is made that this is a person that is not in possession of their full agency to make decisions on the basis of the fact that they are struggling with an addiction, and therefore forcing this person to attend therapy or to go to rehabilitation is okay because it would be the same thing as it would be the same thing as asking a kid to go to rehabilitation who's in juvenile hall, or the same person, it would meet the same standard as the mentally disabled person or the person who was briefly psychotic because they weren't in possession of their agency. So the response that I received to this when I bring this up is that most of the people who are in jail anyway are not in possession of their full agency because many of them are addicts, or because there are economic circumstances or there's some sort of outside influence that made them do something beyond their free will, which
Yeah.
is why they
So
stole from the.
yeah, I want to tackle that for a moment, especially as a libertarian, super against a drug war. I agree with the spirit of that argument. There's one problem, which is the argument hinges upon the capacity for reason, the capacity to understand right from wrong. And research has shown time and time again that that's bullshit. Obviously, we had a little bit of a qualm here about empiricism, right? Like you can never really, the concept of you can never really truly know something. I do agree that you can know things empirically, and that there may be additional information or context that you're unaware of that changes the circumstances, right? So this is how like Newtonian versus quantum physics, or Newtonian physics versus Einsteinian physics, right? It's like they're both true and they seem to contradict, but it's like, actually, no, Newtonian physics is right for everything on Earth, right? But then, the physics from Einstein is showing things in a different domain. So lack of information is information. But nevertheless, the research, and it's difficult to do on people, right? Because people, you can't isolate variables. And so it's really hard to do research on people. That said, there's a fuck ton of evidence that drug addicts know what they're doing is wrong. They just do it anyways. And so when you say that someone loses their moral agency, what you're talking about is they're losing their ability. It's the same thing with argumentation. Even argumentation ethics is the same principle that the state is using in terms of whether or not someone is capable. You lose moral agency when you're incapable of being able to say that a thing is right or wrong. You're incapable of knowing that it's wrong. Drug addicts know stealing the necklace from their grandmother was wrong. They just need that fix so bad that they're willing to do it. They might be ashamed of it. They might have guilt in it, but they know that it's wrong. And ultimately, they have that free will interaction. It might be difficult for them because of all the other factors, but it's no different than a starving person choosing to steal from someone. It's like at any point in time, you could go to a shelter. At any point in time, you could fucking say to yourself, I'm broken. I'm hungry. I'm going to accept the shame, and I'm going to go to the local church near me and say, I haven't eaten in 3 days. Can I please have some food? But you don't want to grab your ball sack and do that. You're not ready to face that shame. So you make the conscious decision to steal food. It's the same thing with drugs. At any point in time, there are plenty of places you can go where you go, I'm fucking sick. Please, I'm going to steal. I'm going to hurt somebody. I'm going to kill somebody. I'm almost out of control. Fix this. And they don't. So yeah, you can kind of go fuck yourself on the drug argument there. I empathize with the difficulty of that, right? And I do think that there is something to be said in terms of like understanding how easy it might be to fix or talk to or help someone that's drug addicted versus someone that's not. Like when they both rob a liquor store and then like they don't expect they don't even have like an armed gun, and then the clerk pulls out a gun and they pull the gun from them and then they shoot them with gun or something, like, and they're high on crack, right? Like while they're doing it. Like I get that that's a different person than like the gang member that like isn't on drugs and just robs the liquor store. but they both know that the action is wrong. So you don't get to claim that they don't have moral agency. It's just, you get to claim this is the lefty bullshit that says that nature is coercive, and it's the same communist logic that leads towards the idea that it's okay to tax everybody to redistribute wealth, and even leads to the idea that property shouldn't be owned because nature's coercive. The drugs are coercive. Hurricanes are coercive, right? So all of a sudden we have this positive right to equality. We have this positive right to same amount of resources, etc. Nah. Tell them to go fuck themselves. Drug addicts know what they're doing.
Well, but on the question of being a drug addict, right? So suppose, for instance, because let's suppose like we'll go back to the liquor store. The person doesn't steal the grandmother's necklace. They don't rob the liquor store. They don't shoot up a bank in order to fuel, I don't know, buying a pound of methamphetamine. Instead,
are you saying they just got caught with drugs?
They just got caught with drugs.
It's a victimless crime. It's not a crime. It's literally not a crime.
Well, but so I don't disagree, but like the argument that's made is that you're forcing this person to go to therapy for the possession of having the pound of cocaine in the back of their seat, right? And you're not. So the question is like, so you're trying to force the drug addict to see that him taking and using methamphetamine is wrong. That's sort of the prince. That's another wall.
Yeah, no. I mean, I get it. It's the coercion of the state to try and change behavior, right? Yeah. And it's them saying drug behavior is bad, so we'll lock up people and we'll force them to go into things and we'll do all these things to try and get rid of whilst simultaneously we'll do Iran-Contra and we'll fund toppling, communist regimes that we don't like in South America with drug money that we're making, with funding the crack epidemic and all the guns, et cetera. Of course, the fraud, right, that I mentioned again, right? So the government's doing all of the shady lies and bullshit on top of it. But even still, the argument at its core is person wants to harm themselves and the state decides that they're not going to let them. It's not a crime if there's no victim. The victim is oneself. And so what you do is you take the victim and you harm them more. And then goes, oh, no, we're patriarchal. We're the daddy government cares about you. Daddy government wants you to behave. Daddy government wants you to be better because once you're better, maybe you'll make more tax revenue and daddy government will get higher GDP. Won't that be so great for you and daddy government? Well, no. And even more so, what's unfortunate about this is that for a majority of these people that are on drugs, hardcore drugs, the rehab isn't really what's going to help more than anything. What's going to help is changing their material circumstances. Right. I don't want to be a communist, right, and say that thus means it's okay to steal from me and redistribute wealth so that they'll be better. And even still, that's not necessarily what I mean by material circumstances, like lack of funds, because like what they'll do is they'll just spend it all on drugs and die. But what I mean is that like they don't have a network, they don't have friends, they don't have meaning in their life, they don't have family. Like these are the symptoms of the drugs. I mean, there's a reason that drugs epidemics occur in tandem with collapsed economies, right? Like if you want to know where drug epidemic hits, it's never the drug epidemic first. They feed off of each other, but it always starts with a collapsed economy. Detroit, Washington, D.C. New York City in certain areas, right? Chicago in certain inner city communities, obviously, right? But in the worst places was like Detroit, Michigan. It was horrible in the crack epidemic. Why? Because the steel industry left. Because you have this massive population that had these great factory jobs. All the great factory jobs left. Now what? And the same thing is true with fentanyl and opioid epidemic. Where is it? Pennsylvania, Appalachia, Virginia, where my family's from. I've lost a lot of people to heroin. Right, it's Appalachia. It's coal mining towns. Why? Because the coal mines dried up. It's a chicken and egg scenario. The drugs come after. The drugs are they come after. And so, so I mean, like there's a lot of reasons that I agree with you pragmatically that the state shouldn't be doing it. But ultimately, I think in a perfectly legal justice system, volunteering to allow you to go to re-education and you so choose to do so that you can fit in with society is probably a good thing. The problem is not actually the re-education. It's the non-voluntary aspect of it. It's the coercion of it. It's the fact that these systems are not built to be efficacious. And the reason they're not built to be efficacious is that they're built to make Republicans happy when they vote for someone to be tough on crime. And at the same time, someone to go, I actually care. Look at all these drug programs I started. So the contradictions are the state's maintenance of it, because the state is a coercive element in and of itself and full of corruption and problems.
Well, I agree with so I agree with some of what you said, especially like regarding like just having it as an option. Like I have never like stated like that. So like if there's actually just a program within the jail or within the prison system that says, "Hey, as long as you're here, you can walk down and you can come to this program,
Right.
like we can help you," right?
Oh, you
Like
mean
we
like
will
oh, you mean like not quid pro quo when you say optional, right? Like you mean like
Yeah,
you can either do
no.
10 years or go to this program. You're
No,
saying
I
that's still
mean
coercive, but like if you're in jail doing 10 years anyways and there happens to be a
Yes.
program, you're like, "Oh, of course. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't have a problem with it just being accessible, but what I do have a problem with is the idea that you can spend 10 years in jail or you can go and you can go to this program. And I do, and I don't disagree with you regarding the aspect of material resources and how there needs to be an access to material resources and friends, family, a good job,
That's
access to
mostly what I
food.
mean by material
Right.
resources,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is like
No, I understand.
without meaningful job opportunities
Right. Right.
can often be what I mean, yeah.
This is something like the aspect specifically with the drug addict though, like the specific thing is that just the state of being a drug addict, according to like some of the people that I've spoken to, puts you in the same and the fact that you are choosing to harm yourself, right, with this, they would say that you sitting there and choosing to harm yourself by ingesting or taking this drug is the same thing as the crazy person who thinks that Sam is the devil. So he picks up a butcher knife and he stabs him in the eye, right? So you have, because this person is not of sound mind, it's therefore okay to force them to go to rehabilitation, to force them to go to rehab against their
Yeah,
will
that's bullshit,
because they're,
like we said before.
yeah, yeah.
Because there's a substantive difference, right? And it's really that simple: is that they know right from wrong. They choose to do wrong. They choose to do wrong because it's easier than doing right. Period. Now,
Mhm.
yes, their circumstances are different, right? Everybody's circumstances are different, right? Everyone has difficulties in their life, right? Like like there's a period in my life where, yes, I had a car, okay. So most people didn't know that I was homeless, but I was living in my car. I was, I had like a Gold's Gym membership and I would go in, or not Gold's Gym. No, it was Gold's Gym. And I would, I would go in and shower, get a workout shower, kept my clean clothes in my trunk, my dirty clothes in my back seat. And I would keep everything clean, I'd get everything. So most people didn't know, but like I didn't have a home. I was super stressed. I was living paycheck to paycheck. When I say I was living paycheck to paycheck, I don't mean paycheck to paycheck. I mean, I was taking cigarettes off of the street and crushing the burnt part and then crushing them into a pile and then rolling a cigarette from 20 used cigarettes so that I could have a cigarette because I couldn't afford cigarettes. And there was plenty of times where I was tempted to steal. And the temptation then, let me tell you, when it's been 2 days since you've eaten, the temptation to steal is really fucking strong. It's really hard to say no. And I said no. That doesn't make me a fucking hero. It's a choice and you have a choice. And like, yes, there is a point where you no longer have that choice, but that choice is the point where you no longer know right from wrong. That's when you're hallucinating and you're delirious and you don't even know where your hand is and you don't know. Like, yeah, when you steal, then I don't blame you in any way, shape, or form for committing some crime in that sense. Like, I think you have to pay it back, obviously. Like, you're still held blame the same way that you're blamed for manslaughter because of negligence and life circumstance, et cetera. But like, there's a substantive difference to stealing because you're hungry and stealing because you're delirious and you have no idea what's going on. You're hearing voices. Because let me tell you, you go long enough without food, you'll start hearing voices. You'll start seeing fucking weird shit in your vision. Right. It's the same thing with drugs. It's like I said, there are plenty of places, unless you live out in the middle of fucking nowhere. If you live near a city and you have the means to get to a city, I don't care what drug you're on. There's a shelter that'll take you in right now that'll help you get off drugs. or church. If you're in a city with a population over, let's say 200,000, right? Because like what some people define as a city might not be a city, right? But if you get to a major city in your state, there are plenty of ways to get off drugs for free. You just don't want to do it because you can't admit that your life is falling apart, and you're trying to keep the lie and the facade that you're telling to everyone together. And you're too ashamed, so you'll just keep doing the drugs, and you'll keep hurting people that you love.
No, and I appreciate you like walking through this with me because I have had this is probably my least lefty take that I've ever had that in my life. And I have to tell you, it's not always fun to give this take and then to be dogpiled by 20 people when I try to walk through it. Like,
No.
Yeah. But I
try
do
being a
think
libertarian. You get dogpiled for every take.
I just think that like there's something like really insidious, and so this is like this is maybe a topic for another day. I actually have to thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Scott, for talking to me. Thank you, Prime, for hosting the panel. I do have an obligation at 8:30 to, I believe it's 8 or 8:30.
Yeah, we can get out. We can get out of here pretty soon. That's fine.
Yeah,
I got to get some dinner anyways.
Yeah, so like let's say maybe until 8 o'clock just to make things clean. Prime.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is Prime even here?
I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know.
I'm here. Obviously.
Okay. It's good to verify. Okay. I will tell you though, like I am sort of I have been very disturbed at like some of the responses that I've had to giving this take, where people will say, yes, you have the right to somebody else's mind. Of course, we have the right to tell people what to think or what to believe. You know, we do this with public education. I've heard that those types of responses so many times, and I find them to be like a huge overreach and to be deep. It unironically kind of Orwellian when I hear people like give that type of response. I've never liked it. I've never appreciated it. And I don't even know where I was going with that. I just wanted to thank you for helping me walk through.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I want to walk through that a little bit, just for a second, just here at the end.
Yeah,
because I think it connects to everything else that we're saying, which is you have a moral intuition that there's something wrong with your body being owned, with your mind being owned, at least, right? You have a moral intuition somewhere in you that like these things aren't okay no matter what you say. And I have attempted to offer one of those arguments where that moral intuition comes from. I think it's cognitive bias. That's what I think it is. I think when you hear somebody from the left being consistent with the same principles that you hold, you go, holy fuck, that's monstrous. To say that you own the mind of people, that you can re-educate people to be the proper citizens they ought be. And you go, but isn't the social contract theory this voluntary kind of thing? Like, how are we voluntarily a part of something when the state has the right to come in and mind control me? What consent is even there? I think what you're seeing is the beginnings of those kind of cracks in the philosophy. Maybe it's presumptuous of me to say it. Maybe it's paternalistic and kind of patriarchal to be talking down to the feminists and be like, well, let me mansplain where this is coming from. But ultimately, I think that's what it is I think that there is a cognitive bias that shows that deep down, you know, you have a right to who you are and your body and your mind. And that if people try and take that over and control that for the greater good, that there's something deeply evil about that. And yet you're affirming a system that says that that's okay so long as it's not too bad. And I think that's why it's disturbing you, because the lefties, the super lefties, they'll bite the bullet. They'll go, yeah, nature is coercive. Man is evil to his core. Man needs to be re-educated so that he can obtain class consciousness, so that he can understand that capitalism is a myth bred into him, etc.
So and again, I've admitted that this is a flaw, at least like when I like get into conversations, like and even into debates, it's that admittedly a lot of like what I argue, like on a very foundational principle, it is based in moral intuition. It's not, I don't know if I can always like I don't know if I can always completely justify it, but that is something that I use to guide me. But I'll be frank with you, Scott, and maybe this is not the best note to end on. This is sort of part of the reason like why I don't know and you can blame it on bias as if you want. Why my moral intuition steers me away, in a sense, from libertarian ethics, and that would be that my concern. So you can call it as lefty as you want, but my concern isn't really, like we can say marginalized groups, but that's not really what I mean. My main concern are groups of people in society that legitimately, I think, do not have agency. And it seems as though we do have a moral responsibility to these people. And without there's some presence of a state, that there's some presence of collective responsibility, some of these people who did not ask to be here, like children, people who are mentally disabled, people who or even people who are simply psychotic and do something without realizing it. These are people who it seems morally intuitive that we have a responsibility to these people, to people who legitimately
I agree.
can't make moral decisions, who are here beyond their decisions.
I agree.
And it seems as though, like, from a libertarian ethics perspective, that these are people who ultimately, one way or the other, fall through the cracks. Like they are
No.
people who, yeah.
I would say this to in some, just as a little quick thing to that. I agree. Right? Like when I see the poor, the impoverished, the mentally challenged, I think to myself, God, we've got to do something to help these people. It's not an altruistic feel from me, right? It's that I don't want to live in a world like that. Like even in my own rational self-interest, I don't want to live in a world where these people are left aside, that they're harmed or that they're not taken care of, especially once I realize that one day I'm going to be old and I'm going to have to live in a world where they have the power. And when they grow up, are they going to remember, like my generation does, how much the boomers fucked them? Are they going to care about me? Or are they going to build a society that, can I build a society that lasts if I don't take care of the next wave of those that are to inherit said society? The difference, I would say, between us and the statists is that the state uses violence to try and force people that don't want to take care of these people to take care of them. And I can't imagine a worse thing for those without power. I can't imagine children or the elderly or the mentally deficient being forced by the government, threats of violence, to take care of children they don't want, parents that hate their children, or caretakers and parents that have to take care of grandma because no one else will take care of them. They despise and resent them. And, maybe gain Munchausen's by. I can't imagine that being the best solution. I would far, far rather shitty people that don't want to take care of their kids be free to abandon them so that people that actually want to take care of them, so that NGOs and programs can do that. And instead of having 50 or 60% of all wealth generated in the US stolen by a government that squanders our money on bullshit projects, if we could have that money back so that we could spend the money as a community to actually take care of people, these people would be helped instead of harmed. And that's one of the major reasons why I'm a libertarian, not one of the things that keeps me from being one.
Interesting. I don't know if I'm completely sold, but Scott, thank you so much for your time. This is a really good conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope that you did. Prime, you didn't really say a whole lot, but I hope that you enjoyed being here, at least your profile picture below us.
I didn't have to say a whole lot because you guys, Scott was on his best behavior. So that was.
There's a difference between a 1v1 convo and a panel of 9 commies.
Indeed.
Okay.
Fair enough. But yeah, I really love this conversation. It was fantastic. And like I actually do like listening to other people's what is it theoretical or moral frameworks.
Mhm.
And wondering like how I can incorporate these bits into my own to better myself, right? So I don't assume that my framework necessarily is the best. So this was really enlightening.
Cafeteria political philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Cafeteria, something like that.
Christopher Hitchens had that thing about Christians and Muslims and stuff where they pick and choose parts they like about their religion and get rid of the rest. Called it cafeteria religion.
Yeah.
Cafeteria Catholic. Yeah, we have that. I have this shirt, by the way. So This is Christopher Hitchens. For those of you who don't know, this is the Hitch shirt. You can get it on Etsy. It's based, okay? So.
All
He's
right.
an asshole, but he's great.
I'm going to read out to our friend Wick and support him. So guys, be kind. Lactoid's there, so you'll get more libertarianism. So that'll be great. Or pretend no libertarianism. I don't know how like Scott feels about lactoid in any particular day. But anyway, off you go.
Libertine.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This was a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna hop out of here as well.
Yep. Thank you, Prime. Thank you, Scott. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. All right, let's Yo, every time I put in StreamYard, it always wants to do StreamYards. Like, which is like a non-website that doesn't exist. It's not libertarian-ish. Yeah, libertarian-ish. All right, let's throw some music on. Yeah, I don't know if there's much to say here. That was fun. I think there's this like assumption. There's like this assumption whenever I talk that I'm gonna like be like super like aggro on people. I'm like, nah, dog. Like, yeah, if you let me speak, you let me like talk about my opinions on things. Like, you know, I'm much more relaxed. Yeah, that is true. John Jacob, Hinkle Scheimer Schmidt or whatever. I don't remember the whole song. She can hold a conversation well. It's very interesting to like talk with someone and know that the entire time you're talking, it's like they really just want to prove that like your abortion take is wrong. And it's like I could see her coming along. Well, okay, but what about this thing? And it's just like, no, like I actually do have an answer for pretty much all this stuff. I don't know. It's funny to watch people like want to be mad, but like they kind of can't maintain the anger. But she was good. John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. That's it. There you go. But yeah, I think we'll do this again tomorrow. I have a WIC panel tomorrow. So I think I'm going to do it again. I don't know, just kind of see how this YouTube streaming thing does. And then there's a video I'm working on. I'm so fucking ADHD. It's difficult for me to get this shit out. Videos out. I have like 20 projects I'm working on. There's like one that I'm working on. And like I might do a reaction or something. I want to see how a couple of live streams affect how the non-live stream videos go out. Like, do they go out to a smaller audience because they're not live streams? Do they do poorly or do they do better? And then that once I put out a couple videos that aren't live streamed and I get like a little bit of a data, I'll know whether or not I should continue to do these streamed or whether or not I should just do better and quicker editing. No, I haven't hit 2K subs yet. I'm like, I keep hovering. I think I'm at like 1990 last time I checked. I think I'm like 10 away from 2K. So if you guys want to sub to the channel, please do. Let me see real quick. Yeah, I'm still at 1990. Not a single person that watched here subbed. But also, to be fair, I highly doubt any of my live streams go out to anybody in general, probably. But most certainly, they only go out to people that are already subscribed. Yeah, she did try to like dodge Aristotelian logic there for a minute, and then she just accepted it, and I was like, okay, all right, I'm not gonna hammer on that. Just try to reach out to more different political content creators. I don't think you guys know how hard that is. Like, I think you guys, I think you guys think that like I can just like DM people. It's something I've noticed a lot on like, even when I was on Twitch and stuff, people will be like, just DM this person. But like, they don't have open DMs. None of these people have open DMs. You have to be introduced to these people, right? Like, so like you have to like find somebody that you do know and then convince them to introduce you to a person that they know. And that's really just kind of how the entire game works. It's a clout game. Like, even the people that have open DMs, they don't check their DMs and they'll ignore them. So like unless they're like really small and they don't get DMs. Also, who really trying to be bothered like that randomly? Yeah, I mean, that's true too. Like, I mean, it's not necessarily gatekeeping just to, reach out to streamers who mostly want an echo chamber. Yeah, I mean, there are cliques, and I'm not really in any clique, right? Like, there's like the Christ-pilled conservative right clique of Andrew's group, and like, we do shit every now and then, but like, we're not in the same group. You know what I mean? Like, if he tries to connect me with people, there are people that will be distrustful of me, right? So it's a social cost for him to try and network with me to connect me with somebody else. So unless there's like somebody that he meets that like he thinks maybe will pop it off, he's not going to do it. I mean, if he really asked, he could, but I'm not trying to ask him to constantly connect me with people. I mean, I do occasionally, right? And it's the same thing true with lefty Twitter and, and Twitch and shit, obviously. You versus Jay Dyer. Yeah, Jay Dyer blocked me. Jay Dyer got mad at me because he wanted to debate a libertarian, and I was like, hey, I'll debate you. And then he debated like this prag that was a total goofball. And I was just like, oh, like there was comments from tons of people showing you good libertarians and Christian libertarians, and you grab some silly goofball that's like a lefty that was like pro Biden, like just clearly a non-libertarian. I was like, you clearly just pick someone that like you could shit on for your audience for like the fun of it. Like, you weren't actually trying to learn about libertarianism or like have a conversation about libertarianism or like a genuine debate. And then he was just like, I can't believe you would jump immediately to accusing me of doing that, and then blocked me. It's like, dog, I assume that of everybody. Like, I just assume you're a piece of shit if you're in the Twitch, YouTube politics until you prove me wrong. Like, if I don't know you, you're a piece of shit as far as I'm concerned. Like, you know what I mean? Like, come on. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it'd be weird. Like, so if you then give me evidence to prove that like you're not real, I just assume you're a grifter. Like 99% of all of these people are grifters, and you guys know it just watching them. Let me tell you, being behind the scenes, you learn a lot more about these people, and most of these people are two-faced almost immediately. Super nice to you in DMs and shit, and then raging the moment you get on camera. Shit like that. Like, I've had so many people pretend to be like my buddy and then immediately like come at me. Yeah, but it's not just the lefties, John Jacob. All your right-wing friends are like that too. Or they're not even real right-wingers. They're pretend right-wingers, like fucking Connor or fucking Tiberius D or fucking oh God, what's that pretend Christian? That's like the only thing. He's like a lefty now. He was out canvassing for the Democrats, and he pretends to be a right-winger, trying to get that fucking progressive victory money. Can't remember his name now, but he's admitted that he's like a centrist now. No, not Wick. Wick is a lefty. Oh my God, what is his name? He's like a pretend Christian. I've done a couple of panels with him. He's friends with oh God, that pedophile. Not pedophile, just groomer of a 17-year-old so he can fuck them in New York once they turn 18, and everyone acted like it wasn't a big deal. Oh God, what is the I can't think of his name. It is whatever. Yeah, I mean, Counterpoints is openly working for progressive victory, and so is Tiberius D. Well, Tiberius D is just hanging out. I apologize, but I can't remember his fucking name. What is you guys don't know? Not James Woods, small streamer. He was like hangs out with Stardust, Twitch guy. He's like Catholic. He just had a baby, super skinny little guy with like sometimes has a goatee. He works on like intelligence for the army or something, or like drones or some shit, or IT or something. I don't fucking know. Why can I not remember his fucking name? He was in that photo where they were all hanging out at the Progressive Victory thing. He's the only other conservative that was there. No, not lecture fan. Lecture fan doesn't meet any of the criteria I just said. Share the picture. That I have to find the picture. Oh my god. See if I can find the image. I'm not seeing it on Google. Yeah, I'm sure Wick has the pic. I'm not gonna fucking try and DM Wick in the at the end of this to try and get a picture. Did you miss a good? Well, you didn't miss it. You can rewatch it, buddy. But yeah, this was a good conversation, I think. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go live again tomorrow. And like I said, and then we'll do that to panel, and then I have the kids this weekend, and then we'll see kind of just what happens when I put out a couple of standalone videos. See whether or not this is a good look. And I got to figure out some more YouTube streaming stuff, because I'm definitely not doing Twitch streaming, because there's too much competition between YouTube and Twitch. There's too much shit where it fucks up both. Where a bunch of you guys won't watch me on Twitch because you'll just wait for it to be on YouTube. And then a bunch of you will see it on Twitch, so you won't watch it on YouTube. And basically it just kills the numbers on both. And everyone's like, well, that's what Destiny does. It's like, yeah, Destiny can get a couple thousand people live, in an instant. Being like, today I'm going to play StarCraft mobile game and talk about how this crazy person I bring on is mentally challenged to their face. And then the people will be like, fuck yeah, let's go. You know what I mean? So it makes sense when he's on multiple platforms that he gets a lot of rewatchability and shit. Yeah, a bunch of people are banned on Twitch. I just meant between never mind. People were doing it because bigger people were doing it, right? Take Hassan, for example, right? Hassan puts all his streams up on YouTube and, and has all his clips and shit. And people are like, oh, that must be the way to do it. And it's I don't actually think it is. I think you need to have content on other places so that people have places to see you if you get banned. But I don't think splitting the audience actually works. Shouldn't describe Pisco like that. No, Pisco's special. All right, I'm going to get some food. I'm going to get out of here, boys. Appreciate you. Join the Discord. Give us a like. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Only need 10 more to hit 2K. That'd be fun. All of these videos immediately get demonetized anyways, and they don't get sent out into the algorithm. So, I don't know. Share them if you want to, but, at least give us a like. There's 19 here and 16 likes. And I've got 125 views. A bunch of you have not liked this. So give it a like at the very least. Appreciate it. Hell, give it a dislike. At least it's engagement. Appreciate it. Thank you. And join the Discord. I'm usually there. I'm not always there, but a lot of times I'm watching my kids. I'm not streaming. I'm not making content, but I might hop on Twitter or hop on Discord. So come hang out. Peace.